Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Rias breaks Naruto heart part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. The fourth great ninja war had reached its peak. Everyone in the world was currently under the infinite Tsukiyomi, leaving Team 7 to fighting the real mastermind and final villain. Kagaya Otsutsuki was revived after centuries of being locked away, Black Zetsu secure and talking shit to the best bros of Team 7, Naruto and Sasuke, while Kakashi and Sakura helped when they could. Obito was not part of the picture as Kagaya snuck an ash bone dagger through a portal to the back of the Uchiha criminal's head. She really wasn't approving of his whole reasonings of bringing her back just so he could get back with a minor while he was a grown adult. The horned celestial woman had dragged the four fighters to another world, this one barren as she had to admit, the two young men were quite the pair, coupled with the pincat and the teacher they could topple her. In the middle of swatting attacks and dodging hits, Kagaya's mind was struck by a flash of white, causing her to stumble mid-fight. Seeing this as an opening, Team 7 lunged in, Kakashi and Sakura to immobilize while Naruto and Sasuke ready to seal her away. Before they could, Kagaya lashed out with a wave of power that threw all of them back, hands coming to her head as she let out a groan, her mind flashing through images of past, present and a future threatened by a person she was wary of. "Mother, what's wrong?" Zetsu asked as he peeked out from the HUD to her. Sasuke and Sakura saw this moment to strike, but Naruto's chakra limbs had grabbed and rooted them down, as Naruto himself was cautious but curious. Normally he would join in on the moment to take down the evil woman, but something was making him have second thoughts. Kagaya let out a sigh as she raised her gaze and focused on Naruto specifically. With a finger pointed to him, she said only a few words. "I'd like a moment with you, boy." With that she vanished in a burst of speed, appearing right before the group and sending out chakra fist to push away Kakashi, Sasuke and Sakura as she grabbed Naruto before he could react, a portal consumed them, both leaving the trio alone. "Well shit," Kakashi muttered as he feared what Kagaya was doing to Naruto as Sasuke and Sakura had similar thoughts. Kagaya's personal home. Naruto's eyes snapped open as he found himself staring at a wooden ceiling, finding himself in a nice bed, the sheets and mattress leagues better than his apartment he'd like to admit. Sitting up as he noticed he wasn't in Sage of Six Paths mode, his jacket was on the rack by the door and his sandals were not on either. Getting out of the bed, he looked through the open space that was the window to see a forest of bamboo, as far as the eye could see. "Great, now, where am I?" he asked as he then felt something nudge his foot and looked down to see a white rabbit. Said critter moved to the doorway and looked back to him as Naruto picked up the motion to follow it. He found himself in a castle, but the architecture was older than the ones like Hazuki Castle that he knew of. There were few decorations here and there and paintings of worlds and stars that made him curious. Was Kagaya from beyond the stars? Soon enough the rabbit led him to a room that had a balcony with a greater view of the bamboo forest, showing the sky was clear and the distant mountain ranges were topped with snow. His attention was to the person sitting and watching said view, her back turned to him as he frowned and went into soft mode. "I did not bring you here to turn my house into a battle zone, child. I ask that you take a seat and listen to my words, please." Now that threw Naruto in a loop as he returned to normal, just now noticing the wooden box that was beside Kagaya and shaking as he sensed Zetsu within it. He walked over and sat down beside the woman hailed as a goddess and a monster. She was enjoying some brewed tea and offered him some that he accepted. Both looking over the beauty of nature before them as Naruto had questions, loads of questions to be honest. "I suppose I should explain why I started this, my descent into madness and subjugating humanity to become my servants. I hail from the Otsutsuki, a clan of celestial horned beings that travel the dimensions in search of what we call God trees. We cultivate and harvest their fruit to gain the immense powers granted from the divine food. To us, power is the only law, no concept of love or bonds as you like to preach. When I arrived to this world for the tree, I had the same mindset, gather for the clan and become a god, but my time among the humans had my goals shift and change. Motherhood had me wanting something for my children, who would be put to the sword due to their hybrid lineage. Of course, over time I grew more paranoid and with my Otsutsuki clansmen still out there, I took harsher actions to safeguard my home." She explained as Naruto was getting the picture. "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." He muttered out as he was understanding the woman. She sipped her tea and continued, not minding Black Zetsu shaking in his cage as he was not able to talk right now. "I grew corrupted with my power and my dreams of peace and a home for my boys was shattered. I may be the princess of the clan, but they are quick to off those who stray from their goals of ascension. I had formed the Zetsu army knowing that they would arrive sooner or later. Hagoromo and Homura finding out along with my mental instability is what set everything else in motion. However, as I look upon you, I see a chance." She said as she shifted her full body to face him, her third eye closed as Naruto was puzzled. A chance for what exactly? This has Kaguya's smile, not that sinister smile from before when she was revived, but a genuine smile, looked better than the other one. Life to flourish and to put a stop to my clan, I won't mince words when I say we are a clan of parasites. The god trees themselves are not of our making, we harvest their spoils for ourselves, while growing and consuming one fruit is worth hundreds and thousands of lives. The population can overcome and fill up the losses over time from the harvest of one fruit. However, continuous harvesting of the tree strips away all life on the world, everything dies, and the planet along with the tree is just a barren and withered husk of mass floating through the vastness of space. And we just move on, searching for more trees and fruits to claim while ending entire worlds and races on petty superiority. She finished as she set her cup down and averted her gaze from Naruto. The blonde teen was processing all this as he was now starting to sympathize with her. She had her beliefs changed and wanted to do things determination in his eyes. Kaguya looked back to him with a look of admiration, just how much did she hide behind the stone-cold facade? What came next surprised them both as Kaguya leaned in and kissed him, not on the forehead or cheek, on his lips. It felt nice, way better than the one he had with Sasuke a while back, which was an accident. It was a moment before the two realized what was happening and they separated. Both looking away and apologizing. Sorry, I don't know what came over me. No worries, I'm the one who jumped and both were blushing as they gave a glance to each other. But it was nice, Kaguya said as they stared a bit more, then leaned in to engage in another kiss, this one growing deeper as Kaguya let her royal face drop and centuries of confinement and loneliness bubbled up. For Naruto it was as if he was getting the chance to relax, the fate of the world was not in jeopardy and he can kick back for a break. She teleported the two of them to her personal bedroom as things got hotter and clothes were stripped, hands were roaming and tongues mingling. Jiraiya would be so jealous. Later. After an unspecified moment of time of nothing but carnal desires unleashed, Kaguya and Naruto were back in the room from before, both clothed again, but obviously had enjoyed the actions earlier very much. After the sex, the two learned a bit more about each other while they lay in the bed together in embrace. Naruto found out that Kaguya's former love was quick to turn on her and have her hunted down for peace, reminded him of the Akatsuki. Kaguya learned that Naruto felt alone despite all his friends and comrades, his family was taken on the night of his birth, thanks to Obito. Right now, the Otsutsuki princess was back in the room with him, both looking none less for wear besides a light glow to them. Kaguya placed her hands in a prayer pose and closed her eyes as Naruto remained silent and watched. What are you doing? He asked after a few moments of silence, only to be slapped in the back of his head by some of her long hair and without a beat, she replied without breaking her stance. Calling upon a friend. She replied as Naruto noticed a flicker of sparks in the air which grew bigger, forming a large portal showing a set of old yet holy-looking castle gates. Naruto could feel raw power coming from the other side as the gates opened and a woman stepped through and into Kaguya's domain, walking on air no less. The saw she was pretty would be selling it short, she was very beautiful, add in the regal air she carried as well. She looked at Kaguya with eyes full of disappointment as the portal closed behind her. You have the nerve to pray to me, after what you were doing to these people you wanted to protect from your siblings. Her voice stopped as she noticed Naruto sitting there, confused out of his damn mind between some unknown history between the two ladies. Instantly her regal and cold mood changed to a mix of annoyed and surprise as her hand moved from her sword on her hip to pointing to him as Kaguya put her hands down and opened her eyes to look to her visitor. What is he doing here? I brought him with, Lady Amaterasu. Kaguya said. I can clearly see that, but why did you bring him here? Mortals are not allowed to meet directly with the gods. Amaterasu said as Naruto raised an eyebrow at this. Kaguya let out an uncharacteristic sigh at this. That law is broken, and you know it as well as I do, the other gods and their pantheons don't even give two damns about it and frolic about on the mortal planes for their own amusement and machinations. Kaguya retorted as Amaterasu had to admit she was right there. Naruto cleared his throat as he spoke up before things could escalate. Should I go before things get messy? He asked awkwardly as he felt there was bad blood between Kaguya and Amaterasu and was going to leave the room but was rooted to the spot by Kaguya's hair. Amaterasu glanced to Naruto, then back to Kaguya as she took a seat and summoned a bottle of sake and a few cups for them. That won't be necessary, Naruto, I summoned her here to help us. The rabbit goddess told him as he just shrugged and figured to keep his mouth shut for now. Kaguya poured out the sake for her guests as Amaterasu sat down and accepted her cup, Naruto sipping his as his eyes darted between the two. And what exactly do you suppose I help you with? You're not on my graces for your little stunt, princess. Amaterasu drawled out with a disapproving look on her face as Naruto could feel heat radiating off her, like standing right next to a fire to be honest. Kaguya downed her cup in one go and poured another, holding it in her hand as she looked to Amaterasu in the eyes as milky lavender met golden honey. The end of the Otsutsuki. She answered as this made Naruto's eyebrows shoot up in surprise as he gulped his drink down the wrong pipe, turning away to clear his throat as Amaterasu was curious. She downed her cup and was given more as Naruto came back and asked. Wait, do you mean to seal them away? Naruto asked at first before seeing Kagaya shake her head. No, we've done so much harm to the cosmos and will not stop unless forced. It's time the clan was dealt with for good, seals would only work for so long. Naruto got the memo as he was wondering how the hell was this gonna be a thing. He and the team could barely survive Kagaya fresh off her return, but a whole clan. This is new, and here I thought you were on their side the whole time. Ami said as she continued. So how do you propose the destruction of your own clan, Kagaya? You care for this world so much that you've made it your home and don't wish to leave it unattended, and your family are quite slippery to get a hold of. She asked as Kagaya looked to Naruto and Ami also looked to him, then back to Kagaya. Naruto will hunt them, as for how he is to stand against my brethren, he will need power. I believe the world you watch over with the other gods could be a suitable place to let Naruto grow, wouldn't you agree? She suggested as Amaterasu thought it over for a bit with finger to chin as she soon agreed. You have a point, very well I shall see to it that he is transported there, in turn you will stay and watch over his world, no enslavement, am I clear? Kagaya nodded and bowed to Amaterasu. You humble me with your generosity, Lady Amaterasu. She answered. Don't be a suck-up, princess. The god quipped as she turned to Naruto and sized him up, focusing on the seal on his palm, along with sensing the will of Asura Otsutsuki mingled within his chakra core. She addresses him directly now, Naruto Uzumaki, where you are going is not as kind as this world, you will deal with far more dangerous threats than the Akatsuki and beings of greater power to surpass even Kagaya and myself. Potentially you might change for better or worse, I cannot say how. Do you accept the task set before you? Amaterasu asked Naruto as she stared into his eyes, sizing up the young man before her, as Naruto thought this over for a bit. He was so close to finishing the fight and getting to the dream of peace that Jiraiya had passed on to him. But with this new information, the threat Kagaya's kin posed raised even more concerns. Kagaya was already a huge threat to him and Sasuke at their peak powers as they could barely keep up, her change of minced heart recently was a nice turn as she wanted his help. There would be no point to attaining peace for the shinobi world if another Otsutsuki potentially stronger than Kagaya would arrive and cause chaos. Hell, he knew he and Sasuke would not survive against the rest of her clan if they were to arrive in larger numbers rather than her single visit. But that raised another question. This mission will be of utmost secrecy, Naruto. Not even your friends, no matter how close, cannot know of your pact with me. A cover story will suffice in deterring their attempts to uncover anything regarding our involvement. Kagaya said as she had made a chakra connection with Naruto earlier and had sensed his concern before he even voiced it. Naruto raised an eyebrow but made sense of her words, Team 7 still saw her as a threat and any news of his willingness to even listen let alone to help her would be taken the wrong way. Letting out a sigh as he knew he couldn't say anything to his friends about what he was doing, he closed his eyes and inhaled before opening them and slamming a fist into his open palm with a determined look on his face. Only one way to go and get stronger to face the real threat. Alright, I'll do it, as long as I can protect my friends, I don't care how many places I have to go to. He replied with his tone full of determination and eyes blazing with worth. Kagaya and Amaterasu smiled at him as the sun goddess reached into her sleeve and brought out a small hand mirror, tossing it forward as it enlarged and glowed with several shifting rune circles along the surface. Naruto watched in awe as the glowing runes faded away and the mirror surface grew darker, almost like staring into space with the small dots of light he could see. Seeing his slight confusion and awe, Amaterasu cleared her throat as she spoke. My mirror will take you to the world my domain currently watches over. It is quite different from your world in terms of mankind and other forces. Naruto saw a world come into view as she talked, still fascinated about the logic of life out there among the stars. The mirror then cracked and shattered, the shards flying out and around the mirror itself as they glowed with power, and the now broken mirror pane showed a wispy vortex, a portal. Kagaya and Amaterasu looked to the portal then back to him as the sun goddess smiled. Before I can send you on your way, young man, you have to give up your power. She stated as Naruto was confused by this, but thankfully Kagaya explained. When Ashura and Indra killed each other in their sibling rivalry, their powers rooted themselves to this world as the reincarnation cycle you are a part of. As such you'll feel an undeniable urge to remain here and come back if we had taken you off-world. Same as with these tailed children Hagoromo had created from my power and all living beings tied to chakra. The belief of you being unable to live without chakra is not true as mankind had existed before my arrival and Hagoromo's gift. As such, stripping you of your chakra will not harm or kill you, but it will leave you severely weakened. Hopefully you can find a way to amass your own power and build yourself back up if not surpass what you have achieved with chakra alone. She reached and placed a hand on his head as he felt himself getting sleepy and heard both women say in unison. "We wish you good fortune in the fights to come." Naruto was out of it before he even hit the floor, but was held up by an invisible force as he floated between Rabbit Goddess and Sun Goddess. His shirt was moved up and Kagaya held a hand over his torso as she began draining the chakra from Naruto's body, the golden energy coming from Naruto and forming a sphere above him, took a bit but he was drained dry, looking a bit paler than his usual complexion as Kagaya then removed his headband and tucked that in her sleeve as his chakra floated beside her. The Mataratsu looked over Naruto as she tapped his forehead and added a small amount of her power into his body to keep him safe while traveling through the portal, as humans can't travel like supernatural beings do unless they wish to die by the raw power tearing them to atoms. Kagaya moved and placed a kiss on Naruto's forehead and spoke in a gentle tone. "Be safe, Naruto Uzumaki." And with that Naruto was sent through the portal and disappeared from view as the glass reformed onto the mirror before it shrunk back to its regular size and Amaterasu put it back in her sleeve. "Now what do you plan to do with that?" the god asked as Kagaya let the orb float before her before she replied, "I plan to return it to the earth, put a stop to the sibling rivalry that has persisted for centuries, and end the reincarnation cycle. Would you allow me to make amends for my failure?" The Mataratsu thought for a moment before she reached and tapped Kagaya on her third eye, making a close-on reflex, and then tapped the sphere as an inner silver light filled the core. "When you return, you will find that Naruto's chakra mixed with Ashura's will have better results when returned to the planet. Also, you will release the tailed beasts from your chakra, they have earned their existence." She commanded as Kagaya bowed and was about to take her leave, while Amaterasu opened a portal back to her home. "Oh, and Kagaya, I will grant you this second chance, don't muck it up like before. And be sure to raise the sun skyward. Till our next meeting, Bunny Princes. She smiled to the pale Otsutsuki with a light chuckle before the portal closed and she vanished from view. Kagaya was interrupted from her moment of calm when the box containing Black Zetsu rattled and he let out a snarl. "Let me out of this box, mother." His demand was answered as she shot an ash bone spike that skewered the box through and BZ as the blob died crumbling to ashes being blown in the wind. With that, the princess of the Otsutsuki clan left her home in one of her portals. Back in the shinobi world. She arrived and looked over the world as the sun began to rise, illuminating the massive collection of cocoons hanging from the roots of the god tree that Madara had activated with a grand illusion. With a snap of her fingers, she opened a small portal that dumped Team 7-Naruto back to the battlefield grounds. With another snap, she had the jutsu cancel as the many dreamers were released from their prisons. The image of the Rin Sharingan over the moon shattering like glass as the night ended and the day emerged. Everyone was coming to as they looked around, while Team 7 looked to the floating Kagaya as she raised her hand and Naruto's chakra above her head, right in line with the sun as it glowed brightly and grabbed everyone's attention. Without any words or commands, the orb of chakra began pulsating and letting off waves of its power that flowed over the world like a heartbeat. While everyone was feeling the raw warmth and presence from the chakra flowing over them, Kagaya pricked her finger with a nail and let 10 droplets of her blood mixed with her chakra drip below her in a line. The spots convulsing and growing in rapid size as the tailed beasts, including the elusive zero-tailed leech, were returned to the world. Now everyone was confused as they were happy to be alive. The reanimated remaining cages burst into light as all but one remained. The light dispersed to reveal Minato Namikaze was back to his living breathing self. Minato looked over himself in wonder at this miracle when he felt a hand on his shoulder turning him around and pulled into a bone-crushing bear hug. Kushina was also back as well as she didn't know how, but she felt the presence of her son just before finding herself alive. Kushina Minato uttered out as he hugged his wife as both parents were reunited. Kagaya looked up as she saw many golden lights rain from the heavens to the ground as some emerged from the sealed away animations and others emerged from the ground. Looks like Naruto's will was more than just peace, but to return those who were unjustly snuffed out. Watching deceased relatives reuniting with family, comrades coming together, felt nice for a change as Kagaya lowered to the ground. Only to be met with Sasuke's sword aimed at her. "What did you do to Naruto?" he demanded as that was Naruto's chakra he recognized, but Naruto wasn't with. Kakashi and Sakura were also worried as Kagaya saw all attention was on her now. Time to play her role and cover for her man, I mean Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki made the ultimate choice of giving up his life and chakra to restore the peace to this war-torn world, in the process resurrecting loved ones that had been slain before their time. This shinobi war has come to an end with his choice, and all of you should take this time of peace to rebuild and reconnect. If not for each other, then for the man who brought you all together. She spoke in a tone that held no room for rebuttal, but of course that wasn't enough for Sasuke. Bullshit, how come you have Naruto's chakra and he's nowhere in sight? The last Uchiha growled out as he was angry. Of course Kagaya just floated over to the young man and moved his sword away with a finger before speaking to him directly. Staring into his mismatched eyes as she sensed the lone wolf nature of Indra within his chakra, she also had to put her other grandson to rest. Before anyone could react, her hand came and impacted his sternum in a palm strike, making the Uchiha double over and cough harshly as Kagaya held a small silver-purple sphere. Having separated the will of Indra Otsutsuki from Sasuke's chakra as she then crushed the orb and watched the ghostly soul fly upwards to join his family in the afterlife. Now turning her attention to Sasuke. "Fly home little sparrow, enjoy your morning grub before the rest of the nest takes it," she said cryptically as Sasuke's eyes widened in understanding before he turned and ran, chakra boosting his speed as he hopped through a portal he opened and closed after him. Sakura calling out to him in worry, Kakashi just patted her head as he then saw Kushina and Minato approach Kagaya. The Uzumaki nodded all happy and on the verge of tears. "Is it true, is my baby boy really gone?" she asked as Minato held a somber look and supported Kushina, both parents hoping this was some cosmic joke that their only child gave up his life so they could live again. Kagaya sympathized with the distraught Kushina, but the real story was of utmost secrecy. She reached into her sleeve and brought out Naruto's headband, offering it to the duo as they were crying now, and accepted the only remaining item to remember Naruto by. Minato was quick to pick up Kushina before she collapsed while holding Naruto's headband as the fourth Hokage took a seat and cradled his wife. Seeing her part done, Kagaya turned to leave through a portal when Sakura shouted and got Kagaya to look to her. "How do we know this isn't some trick from you to get our guards down for a surprise attack?" the medic asked, seeing as she was fighting the rabbit goddess earlier, it made sense to ask with a sudden shift to ending the conflict. Before he passed on into the afterlife, Naruto Uzumaki made me vow to never harm the inhabitants of this world and to let you all live out your lives without the threat of madmen like Obito Uchiha to ruin it all. Seeing as it would be rude to deny a dying man's wish, I accepted his vow and take it upon myself to maintain the order and safety of this world. She replied, before leaving back to her home and vanishing from sight. Now with the early morning shining over the land, the Shinobi Alliance was left to wonder what now and collect their people to return home. Well, it was majorly a happy time for those revived. Minato and Kushina were heartbroken as they couldn't be a family with their son. Kakashi would approach to try and help his teaching friend, but he was feeling exhaustion and was caught by someone before his knees gave in. "Easy there, Kakashi, you're dealing with chakra exhaustion and you need a nap." A familiar voice filled his ear as he looked in surprise to the young woman holding him, looking to have grown up from the child years they spent together. "Arin." But Sasuke. Sasuke arrived back at the leaf from his portal and was still in a dead sprint, hopping and weaving through the village as he made a beeline to the old Uchiha district. Upon entering the ground, he saw a sight he remembered from old memories. His fellow clansmen were alive, men, women, children and elders were all back and looking none worse for wear. His arrival did catch the attention of the police members as they recognized him. "Is that little Sasuke? Hey, it's Sasuke. He's grown up so well." While he would love nothing more than to greet his fellow clan members upon seeing them in the flesh again, he was desperate to see what he desired most. Reaching the main complex in his old home, he stopped at the doors to the clan head's home. Taking a breath as he heard muffled noises behind the dusty sliding doors before ripping them open. The young Uchiha was greeted with a sight that had him stunned silent. Sitting at the table was his family, father, mother and brother, and they were in the process of getting breakfast ready when he opened the door. Mikoto's hands went up to her mouth as she recognized her little boy as Fukagu held his usual impassive look while Itachi smiled to Sasuke and greeted him. "You look worn out, brother. Come sit down, breakfast is almost ready." The older brother spoke as he got up to help Sasuke out, whose eyes were glued on his mom and dad. Before Itachi reached him, he did something unexpected. Sasuke pulled his sword and scabbard from his belt and placed the weapon at his feet and bowing forehead to the wood floor to his parents. Itachi watched the act as he could tell Sasuke was in shock but didn't say anything as he glanced to Fugaku and Mikoto. Fugaku got up and stood before the prostrating son of his. Moments passed before Fugaku spoke up. "Rise." Father was just as stern and commanding as he remembered. Sasuke picked up his sword as he did as commanded and stared at his father. While he was trying to hold his usual look, it was easy to see he was holding back the tears for his family. Father and son stared each other down before Fugaku shocked Sasuke by pulling him into a hug as Mikoto and Itachi joined in. The dam that held back his emotions since the aftermath of the Uchiha massacre finally broke as Sasuke started to sob and hugged his family back, Mikoto reaching to pet her crying son's head as she spoke softly to soothe him. He did manage to utter out some words through his tears. "Thank you, Naruto." But Naruto. The comatose blonde was speeding past the stars in a sort of tunnel comprised of misty silver fog circled by kanji runes. Naruto's form had a small air of ivory shielding from Amaterasu spell to keep him from being harmed by the vacuum of space and the immense pressure this tunnel applied as he shot through like a bullet. Humming upon a world that looked similar to the one he hailed from, just there were more landmasses spread out over the vast ocean. The tube would have a drop-off point just above the Earth, somewhere in the stratosphere as he was dumped out and crashed through a planet-encompassing shield over the planet. Like a rock going through a window, he went through the divine shield as it reformed after he went through. The still asleep blonde began heating up as he fell to the world. By now the shield of his was faltering a bit as he fell like a comet to the ground as he landed in the waters of one city called London. Making a big splash as this caught the attention of its people. The godly power pulled Naruto along underwater and soon he was whisked out and into one of the waterway tunnels that lead to said channel he arrived at. He was gently set down amongst old clothes and trash as the divine shield around him pulsed softly and began to change Naruto's body, unknown to him or even Amaterasu. Once done, the shield dissipated away in flakes as he woke up in the damp darkness illuminated by a small lantern. Ah, damn it. Don't tell me I slept on the floor again. Naruto muttered as he rubbed his eyes and viewed his surroundings. Great, he was in a shithole. That's when he noticed something off about himself. The hell, I'm a kid again. Naruto was back at the age of 7 as he stared and examined his reduced form. In every aspect he was a kid except his mind. He then felt a gnawing absence as he couldn't feel his chakra core or even the presence of the tailed beats. It felt weird as one of his senses was now gone and he was now a chakra-less young kid. He also saw that his signature clothes were ready to just tear apart and worn away as he looked around, spotting the lamp. Grabbing the handle as he looked around for any clothes to wear, luckily, he found some, unluckily, they were on the rotting corpse of an orphan boy that was being munched on by sewer rats. Shooing the rats away with the light of the lantern, he set it down and gave a small sorry as he began undressing the cadaver and cleaning the old clothes off best he could before pulling his worn outfit off and putting the new garments on. It wasn't fitted, but it would do for now as he stared at the body, then his old clothes. He felt bad about robbing the dead and dressed the boy in his old ruined clothes and went to trying stones to the limbs before gently pushing the kid's body into the murky waters of the sewer. He couldn't give a proper burial for the child, but he couldn't leave him to be eaten by rodents, least he hoped the watery grave would suffice. Now then, where's the exit? He asked himself as he adjusted his clothes and picked up the lantern to begin his search. Took a while to find an exit as he passed by more trash and critters than he cared to admit. Now he was climbing up the ladder and pushed the manhole cover up and to the side. Peering out, he saw that he was at the end of a hidden alleyway of sorts and the buildings all around him were made of stone and brick. The place also was in serious need of color cause everything looked so drab and lifeless, also the smell was horrible, not as bad as the sewers he went through just now. Getting out of the hole, he pushed the manhole back in place as he stood up and looked around. He watched from the shadows as he watched horse-drawn carriages and people going about in the grimy city. Thinking of his next option, Naruto was unaware of 2 hooded and robed figures sneaking up on him, one holding a large burlap sack, the other holding a small police club. "That boy there will do, just another orphan." One remarked as Naruto heard them but was too late to react as the bag came down over him as he struggled, but one bonk on the noggin later and he was out cold with the 2 figures carrying him away through some old passageways. The next few moments for Naruto upon waking up were filled with pain, suffering, occult practices and inhumane experimentation. The young child was held down and cut open as these strange crystal shards were inserted into his body. He must have blacked out a few times as he remembered being in this large ritual or something as he was surrounded by chanting and praying robed people and he was tied down to a slab with chalk markings along it and the floor as candles surrounded the whole thing. He also saw his own body was stripped bare and runic symbols were painted along his skin in blood, most likely his own. Struggling to get free despite his pain, he felt the candles growing hotter and the crystal inside of him began to hum and pulse, causing even more pain as he let out pain screaming. He could feel the shards inside of him start to grow, merge and spread, just as the whole church they were in was starting to shake. What happened next was unknown to the world as Naruto's body lit up in flames and the fire exploded outwards consuming the cultists, the church and everything in a city block radius. Unfortunately, that was just the beginning as monsters began emerging into the human world from where Naruto once was, the blackened stone slab coated in his blood that the terror emerged from. Unknown location. Naruto would find himself waking up in a place that looked oddly similar to that one town he was in before he was used in the ritual, except the sky was a shade of purple, also he could hear the sounds of a battle going on. Rather than sit around and become a casualty, he decided the next best thing, run and hide away and figure out his situation. Of course, he couldn't really run far as the crystal inside of him kicked up and seemed to hum in this land as it hurt like a bitch to move as he hid in an alleyway that was poorly lit. He heard the sound of snarling and looked to see a heavily emaciated dog creeping out of the shadows and gazing at him with red eyes and a maw filled with sharp fangs, salivating like mad as he groaned out despite his pain and feeling the shard inside him shift more and fill him with a sense of heat. Oh no, the demonic canine lunged at him with a snarl as he reacted and brought a hand up in weak defense. Centuries later. Within Kuo Academy was a club known as the Occult Research Club, ORC for short, as it was nighttime and everyone went home or to their dorms. Well, mostly everyone, as two young women were in the clubroom, both young beauties, wearing similar school clothing as the redhead was at the nice desk going over plans for the upcoming raiding game. Do you think we have enough to go against? I know we just got new additions, but there is only so much we can do within the time period to train for the game against Riser and his peerage. The raven-haired one said as Ria sighed. She knew Akeno was right about this plan, even with her wholeheartedly wanting to help Rias get out of this arranged marriage in the first place. The meeting with Riser earlier went peachy, with Issei getting riled up at Riser and almost starting a fight on the spot. Thankfully Grafia suggested the raiding game to salvage the chat and get Riser off her back for some time. I know, Akeno. As much as I would love to tear up the marriage contract in front of him. This is the only way we can stop this whole thing and I won't have to be dolled up for his amusement. She replied and drank the last of her tea before setting the cup aside. Leaning back in her chair as she looked over the papers with little doodles of her peerage members and their pros and cons. Akeno stood behind Rias and rubbed her shoulders as she smiled softly, using her control over lightning to send small jolts along her master's shoulder muscles to help ease the tension. We will do everything in our power to take out as much as we can so you can kick him in the balls. We won't let you down, Rias. The fallen angel assured as Rias looked up to her best friend as Akeno leaned and planted a small kiss on Ria's lips, which the devil returned before they separated with both smiling. I know you won't, Akeno. I'm just hoping that in case this does go south and we lose, I can at least get you away from his grubby talons. She admitted as she did dislike Riser with a passion for his snobbish man-whoring and privileged ego. She could take the fall if it meant her friends could be safe from him, as she knew he would want to go at Akeno and the others with his comments earlier. She stood up and put the papers away in the drawer as they walked to the door. Akeno opening it to let Rias out first, but gave a look when she felt Ria's hand on her back. On second thought, you go get ready for bed, I'll join you shortly, as I want to make sure we're gonna be stocked up for training and the game. The Gremory heiress said as Akeno nodded and gave a quick hug before leaving for their room, as Rias closed the door and locked it with her back against the wood. She let out a sigh and returned to her desk as she sat and reached under the drawer. Feeling a small prick on her finger and hearing a click, she watched a small compartment open under the main drawer and pulled out a small glass vial with a gold and black cap. The only parchment attached to it was a small tag with the symbol of a stylized rose of blue, purple and red. The contents were a strange liquid of red and black that had similar look to ink. She stared at it as the moonlight peered through the windows. With her free hand, she brought out her phone and tapped the screen a few times and reached to the bottom of her contact list where the number was labeled private, but the picture was of the same design as the flower symbol on the vial. Tapping to send the call, she put it to her ear and waited for a moment for the other end to pick up. Hey, it's me, just wanted to check up and see how you were doing. I'm sure you've heard the announcement of my upcoming game. She started off with a smile and her tone was much more relaxed. She even sounded a bit older by the way she spoke on the line. No, I'm fine, I'm just busy trying to plot out how we plan to beat this asshole. I can assure you that I have this in the bag, there is no need to get yourself involved. She said with a level of confidence. Of course, her smile faded as she listened and turned her chair to look outside the window at the moon. You have a funny way of making a woman feel good about themselves, you know that. The last thing I want is to cause a scene and have my brother get angry, try to ban you from the underworld over our small secret. I bet that would hamper your job immensely even if you are quite the elusive one. She held up the vial and let the moon shine on it as she watched the red and black liquid swirl within. I still have your little gift and I promise to only use it if I have no other options. I just need to make sure my peerage is up to par and ready for the fight. Thankfully Akeno and I planned a training regimen to boost ourselves up. No, I don't want you to stop by and help with that, you'll break them. She couldn't help but giggle and smile, turning back to her desk as she placed the vial away for later. Standing up and stretching as she was tired and ready for sleep. Anyway, I just wanted to hear from you again and see how you were doing. You really like testing my patience, do you? Yes, I missed you, you big oaf. Now stop being mean. She just exhaled in light annoyance, as he did always have a way to make her happy and at the same time annoyed with antics. I'm going to bed and seeing tomorrow where my friends need help with their skills. I hope you have a good night with your assignment. I'll call you after this raiding game is dealt with. See you around, big brute, and good night. She pulled the phone away and hung up and set it on the desk before leaving the orc and going to her dorm to sleep. Hopefully Akino didn't fall asleep on her. Weeks later at the raiding game. It was a failure. They did put up a good fight and took out a good chunk of Riser's gang, but the Phoenix won in the end as he clearly was the better fighter and his peerage had much more experience than Ria's team. One by one all her friends were taken down and out as Issei was the last one to fall. Of course, Sirizich's tempted him with his desire to build a harem all about busty babes and winning Ria's hand as well. While Ria's had objections, this fell on deaf ears as Issei was in op-I mode and fought like he was the hero, except Riser took him out after a bit of annoyance and threw the beaten pawn at Ria's feet. Sorry President. I couldn't save you, Issei groaned out in defeat as his dreams fell apart in his mind. Ria's just knelt and patted his head in sympathy. He was a good kid, really perverted, but a good kid as she was having Asia work on curbing the boy's perviness. She knew he would keep on fighting, but that wasn't needed now. It's fine, Issei. You did your best and that's what matters. She smiled and ruffled his hair before the brunette was taken out of the game by loss, while Grafia announced so. Riaz stood up and stared at the smug Riser and those of his girls he still had on the field as he chuckled. So, my dear wife-to-be, ready to submit and join our houses as one? I can't wait for our HONEYMOON, he gloated as some of the girls giggled with as Riaz stayed silent. She just stood there alone and glared at her arranged fiancé. What, no scathing words, surely you must have something to say before we come together as husband and wife and bring forth lovely heirs for our race to prosper, fate demands it so. He went on as Riaz just kept quiet and let him continue until he got bored of talking about his dreams. Her hands coming up to undo her clothes. She began with her blouse and worked down as the audience began questioning what she was doing from their seats. Riser just saw this as her accepting defeat and offering herself, to which he was oh so happy. You're already undressing for me, this is too rich. Are you that eager to warm my bed? Riser chuckled as Riaz was soon nude. Thankfully she used a small illusion spell to cover her lower sex as she undid her ponytail and let her luscious hair free as strands covered her and she had caught the small vial she had stashed within her, done up hair behind her back and brought it to her side. She swallowed and spoke, loud enough so that all the audience, which the entirety of the devil world was watching as this was a high-stakes game of their noble houses. My parents, no matter how much I love them, are idiots. My brother, in all his childish manners and leadership of the devils, is a moron. There are times when I wish I was just a normal girl, no big responsibilities like arranged marriages being set up when you're a child happy to play with toys or going over the deep politics and all that paperwork. But what can you do, some people are born into roles or molded by their upbringing. I'm no different, I'm a young woman with dreams and wants that were cut short when I learned about my arranged marriage to you and how you presented yourself to the world. Riaz raised her hand and looked down to the vial, her thumb running over the cap and tag as she smiled. But with this, I can change my so-called fate and finally be free of you. She held up the vial for him and everyone to see before she popped the cap off with a thumb flick and downed the contents, coughing at the bitterness as the now empty item turned to ash. As she felt her power morphing within her, she brought her arms together in a self-hug as her wings emerged. The thin devil limbs grew longer and more bat-like as the claws and wing membranes took on a dark red color. Sirizich's and the others rushed in to intervene with this show when Riaz cast her arms out, sending a shockwave and Enochian runes that cast a barrier over the Ranton game field that prevent anyone from getting in. Riaz's friends and family banged and tried using their powers to get through as nothing would work. Riaz then moved her hands before her, manicured nails shifting to demonic claws as sparks of her grimoire powers shot from her fingertips into a sphere of pure destruction. The sphere then shifted and morphed into a lovely dagger, the pommel in the shape of a blooming rose, as the handle and hilt were shaped like rose stem and thorns. The blade itself looked to be made of brilliant crimson gem with a black inner core. The blade floating and twirling in the air before her. Riaz, open this barrier right now. That's an order. Sirizich's yelled out to his sister, some anger in his tone but mostly worry as he could sense the demonic power within her had changed into something different and it scared him as he didn't want to his dear little sister become something horrendous. Of course Riaz heard all the shouts and pleas of worry from her loved ones, but she just droned them out, partially cause the power within her was telling her to crush Riser, and also that she was taking a stand, not as the little sister to the ruler of hell, but as Riaz Grimoire, herself. The dagger finally aimed itself at her and plunged into her chest, right into her heart as she released a grunt and fell back first to the ground, the barrier collapsing as everyone rushed in to grab her. Just as Riaz's back touched the floor, a shockwave of demonic power exploded from her and sent everyone flying back, and the world was blinded by a flash of light. Back in the shinobi world, for those wondering. The nations were celebrating, happy that history's shortest war was over before it lasted long and friends and family we happy to be home with loved ones and reunite with those that were brought back. There will be a time when the nations come together in a joint alliance, but for now, people were partying, celebrating and all sorts of fun and joy, well mostly everyone. Within the Hyuga residence, one Hinata Hyuga was bawling her eyes out into her pillow, heartbroken that the man she longed for was no longer there for her. Her mother, Hinoka Hyuga, stroked her daughter's hair and tried to soothe her eldest child from her woes, as she was one of the resurrected and happy to see her family again. Outside the room door, Hishi, Hisashi and Hanabi watched with pity as they couldn't do much for Hinata. At the bar in the entertainment district, people were having fun and drinking and cheering at the end of the Fourth War, and so on and so forth. In one corner in the back was Kiba, Niji, Shikamaru, Chouji and Sai. Each was somber compared to the others in the place, as they all poured a glass and held a toast for their fallen comrade, who quite literally united all the shinobi together and ended the war with being the only casualty. Glasses bumped together in toast as Kiba spoke. To the boss. The group nodding in agreement as they all took their drinks. In the forests around the Gremory territory. It was raining as a young Rias ran through the woods, tears streaming down her face as she stumbled and came to a stop, hurriedly crawling into a hollowed-out tree, as she could hear the calls of the family's many servants for her, as they were searching for her. She curled up and hugged her legs as her white clothes were stained in dirt and messy. She did her best to hide her presence and cast a small illusion to make herself invisible as she rubbed her eyes and wept. Crying her heart out as she was alone and just let her sadness flow. Did her parents not love her anymore? She made sure to be a good girl and not upset them, how did she fail them? The news of her arranged wedding with one Riser Phoenix was given to her by her parents when they came to her room after her reading time. Obviously, the news wasn't taken well as she left the manor at night when everyone was busy. "I'm a good girl, I swear," she mumbled to herself, sniffling as she wiped her tears with her sleeve and heard the clan servant still out there along with her new friend Akeno. The voices got closer as she didn't want to go back, not when her parents wanted to give her away to some spoiled brat. She heard bad stories about mean masters and their servants from the small talk of the Gremory maids, along with something about this new game that her big brother was working on. The rain was in a constant downpour before it stopped, in fact she couldn't hear the calls of family either. Opening her eyes and blinking a bit to rid herself of any more tears, she noticed raindrops suspended in the air before her. She turned and looked through a hole in the tree she was hiding in and could make out the shapes of butlers and maids, even Akeno too, as they were all frozen in place, as if time had simply stopped for everything but her. Rias gasped as she heard footsteps and turned to face the noise. She was met by the arrival of a young man in black clothing with gold trim. The black cloak he had on for the weather had a red inside and a pretty design. She saw that he was a young man close in age to Sirizich's by look alone, and his pale blonde hair was wet from the rain. Most interesting thing was the faded whisker marks on his face, as his bluish-purple eyes stared at her with a look of sympathy and understanding. She noticed another interesting detail was that he had this strange stained glass design along his exposed skin from what she could see. He moved his arm and held out a black gloved hand to her gently. "Come with me." The current rating game. The flare of light that encompassed the rating game and the audience and the many camera recording faded away as the devils were coming to their senses and picking themselves up. Sirzich's was pulled out of his broken throne by his friends as they all got to see Rias, the new Rias. By the old Satan's Benalana uttered out as she saw what her beloved daughter had become. Everyone saw where Rias had fallen after her dagger plunged into her heart rather than seeing the corpse of the young woman like they thought. Rias was kneeling, her now larger devil wings were covering her as the end claws had small golden ring piercings on them. What was also noticeable was the black bone-like protrusions that were sprouting from between her shoulders and wings sprouting from her shoulder blades. Said bone growth was arching up and looming behind Ria's head, forming a glossy mirror of sorts on its surface, with the image of a lacquer black moon going from phase to phase. Rias inhaled deeply and stood up as she examined herself. The young woman looked to have grown a few inches, and her skin tone was a few shades paler than her fair complexion. She was totally nude in her new form, her chest being barely covered from full reveal by some of her long crimson locks. Her arms were pale at the shoulders, but dipped into a shade of scarlet down to her fingertips, and black nails sharp like claws grew from her fingers. Her luscious hair looked to grow down to her thighs now as her eyes were graced with crimson eyeliner and shadow, as her teal eyes glowed in contrast to her now black sclera with wonder while looking at herself. A pair of golden horns in the shape of a crescent moon jutted through her hair. The biggest change was that her body from the hips down was that of a beast, a camel to be more precise, as the head of said animal had grown out from her pelvis. Her legs were that of a camel, and her feet were hooves. She was indeed nude on her lower body, but the beast's lower half hid her sex, as her fine ass was still prominent despite the beastly appearance. She even had grown a tail just like a camel coming from her tailbone as it wiggled a bit. Finally, she had a sort of belt that lay just over her body where woman and animal met, in the shape of a gold duchess crown, and inlaid with numerous gems of sapphire, emerald and ruby. A few gold chains circled along her waist just connected to the crown, as there was a thicker chain that went through the eye sockets of the camel head growth and connected to the crown. "Oh my, this feels so surreal," Riaz complimented in a tone of joy, and with her voice sounding echoing as she ran her hands along her body, taking note of all the changes, and even laughing at the fact she had a cute tail, grabbing the ribbon for her ponytail earlier, and making a cute little bow that she placed on her tail for some cute points. Now that she was done looking herself over and giving Issei a boner when she groped herself during her examination. The she-devil turned her gaze to Rizer, who looked at her in shock, just like everyone else. Riaz just smirked as her canines had lengthened with her transformation as she spoke up. "Something wrong there, Rizer, you look uncertain about wanting me. Am I not pretty enough for you?" She asked in a mocking tone as the change to the Gremory princess was more than a physical one it seemed. Rizer blinked and regained his signature demeanor as he chuckled, turning to laughter as he spoke in his standard haughty tone. "This new look is quite something, my dear fiancé, I will admit you got me by surprise." With a cheap parlor try his sentence was cut off midway as Riaz raised her left hand and index finger pointed to him. A small bead of her family's pod formed in a small glow before it shot out as a thin beam that punctured the phoenix heir's throat and out the back, all before he could react. He collapsed to his knees and hacked up blood as she just made a hole in his vocal cords to shut him up as his gloating was annoying. His peerage coming to his defense as Riaz stepped back and avoided a hit from Shulin, easily avoiding the martial artist's attacks as she retaliated with superior speed and force. A chop to her neck and a punch to the gut had the Chun-Li look-alike double over in pain and she went for a mule kick to get Riaz. Only to be shocked with Riaz caught her by the ankle through the fire and turned, pulling the rook up and over her head before slamming her down into the ground like a ragdoll and making a small crater. With her other hand, she made a grasping gesture as her hand glowed in power, the ground under Shulin bled in black red ooze and clawed demon hands sprouted out and grabbed the rook. The girl struggling and screaming in fear as more hands emerged and grabbed her before she was pulled under and the ooze dissipated away. Rizer's rook has been eliminated, Grafia announced as she was back in her spectator mode, despite an awe of Riaz and her recent action. "Shulin." Yubaluna called out to the servant as Riaz turned to them and held a smirk as her hands glowed with green and magenta miasma. Without warning, her hands shot forward and small energy spheres in the shape of the full moons were cast from her magic as they impacted and exploded against the peerage, throwing Rizer and Yubaluna back and covering them in demon runes that bound them to the floor as Nai and Li lunged in at Riaz, snarling at the woman. Riaz just stopped her magic and clapped her hands together and her wings came forth to hook the thumb talons on her wrists. What happened next surprised everyone more as magic flared along her limbs and wings before she separated them and revealed that her arms and wings had merged together and split apart. Having a total of 8 demonic arms sprouting from her shoulders as each hand flexed and moved with the wings shifting to become sleeves along said arms. The twin felines were caught off guard as they moved to attack and dodge the multi-limbed Gremory princess. It didn't last long as the two were overwhelmed by the barrage of blows as each was grabbed by the throat and the remaining 6 arms punched them with a relentless fury. The 2 Nikos dropped from her hold as they were down for the count. Rizer's 2 pawns have been eliminated. Grafia's announcement was heard as the defeated pawns vanished from the field. Ria's arms merged back to her regular arms and wings as she heard a shout and moved to avoid a knife from going across her face. Carloman has sword in one hand and dagger in other as she was on the offensive and giving it her all against Riaz. The redhead had an easy time avoid contact with the weapons as she was seeing the knight moving slower than normal thanks to her enhanced senses, thanks to her power boost. The icon of the moon within her bone ring behind her head spun and changed to that of a crescent moon and shined briefly. Carloman was too slow to respond as a crescent moon blade shot forth and sliced through her wrist, taking her hand and knife away as a bloody stump was left. The woman screaming in pain as Riaz just put her out with a backhand that broke the knight's neck and took her out of the fight. Rizer's knight has been eliminated. Riaz was hit by a fireball from behind and looked to see it was Ravel who cast it. She aimed and fired off another fireball as Riaz just sighed before closing her eyes as her moon icon glowed and she was sucked into it. Teleporting in such a manner that looked like being sucked in a black hole as she reappeared behind Ravel and took out the girl with a blow to the back of her head before she could react to her warp. Rizer's bishop has been eliminated. And then there were 2 with the rest of Rizer's peerage being taken out in a matter of moments. Riaz smiled as she looked to Rizer and Yubaluna snapping her fingers as the binding runes vanished and the 2 picked themselves up. Riaz just placed one hand on her hip and the other fixed her bangs a bit as she spoke. "So, still wanting my hand in marriage?" she asked rhetorically as she could smell Rizer's fear and he stank of it. Riaz was hit with one of Yubaluna's bomb spells as the purple-haired devil was throwing many at the other in quick succession, moving to stand before Rizer and defend him from Riaz. "Ah, you witch." The bomb queen screamed out in fury at being denied the win of this battle, as she had hoped to bask in victory over the Gremory princess. The plume of smoke was moving closer to Eubeluna despite her barrage, and a fist shot out and struck her square in the face. Eubeluna stumbled back as her spell stopped and a hand went up to her face as she felt blood and her nose was broken. The smoke being blown away by a flap of Rhea's wings as she moved her hand and stabbed her nails into Riser's queen under her ribsage as she lifted the woman up, who groaned in agony as she was lifted off the floor. Riser growled and tried to act, but Rhea's other hand moved and hit him with another moonblast as he was thrown back and crashed into the building on the field, making it crumble on top of him. Rhea looked up to Eubeluna as she felt her blood seeping down her hand. Without a word she dropped her and let the woman clutch her wound and look at Rhea with venom in her eyes, reaching in her dress for something but not finding it. Rhea just held up her bloody hand and showed off the small red and gold vial full of pink shimmering liquid in her fingers that had Eubeluna in surprise. Looking for this? She smirked as Eubeluna was unable to heal herself. Rhea just made a sleight of hand trick as the vial vanished from her hand and she aimed it, palm outwards, to the downed woman as her pod blazed to life. For a moment, Eubeluna thought she saw pity in Rhea's eyes as she looked down on her before her world was engulfed in power, and the bomb queen felt her every fiber being atomized by the famed power of destruction in a single blast. What was left was a small tear through the ground, and not a single shred of the queen of Riser's peerage was left. Riser's queen has been eliminated. Eubeluna. Riser had dug his way out of the rubble just in time to watch his favorite servant being obliterated by Rhea's as she lowered her hand. She looked to him as the full moon cast its light over the playing field as both kings stared at each other. It's not late to surrender, Riser, salvage whatever pride you have at being bested by little me. She offered. Riser, being his stubborn self, looked and reached out to cast his fire, only to have Rhea's hand clamped down on the wrist and standing in front of him with a frown, surprising him with her speed. She yanked his hand out and squeezed as he gave a gasp of pain as his hand fell limp with the bones of his wrist being crushed. Her other hand shooting and grabbing his neck in a steel grip as he began to choke. Riser was clawing at her grip around his neck as he couldn't breathe as she floated up with her wings spread and held him in the air. Seems I have to pluck your feathers to make you quit. She hummed before punching him in the face, dazing him as his nose crunched, followed by another punch that broke a few teeth, then some backhands that had his ears ringing. She let him go as he gulped down air, only to cough it back up as her fist smashed into his diaphragm and he was sent flying and crashing into the ground. Coughing and wheezing as Rhea's floated down and her majestic wings closed behind her. She just stalked closer as Riser managed to get up despite his pain, but was struck back down with a blast of magic to the face that burned his skin away. He was hit with another blast, then another, each one shredding away his clothes and flesh as his phoenix healing was working to heal him up. She just kept blasting him point blank with her pod as she could hear his screams of pain as his body was in a cycle of wounding and healing. Eventually she ceased her assault on the poor man as she knelt and saw his smoking body, his skin blackened, charred and healing slowly as she could see his muscles and bones. He was barely clothed as those were ruined and he was unable to speak while his throat healed from the bloody mess it had been reduced to from her. She reached and grasped him by his hair as the skin of his face was healing and looked him dead in the eyes as she pulled him up to level. Her other hand going over his groin area as the black and red flames of her magic formed in palm and aimed for his crotch. Say it, surrender now, or I will test how much phoenix regeneration can handle the constant pressure of my power of destruction. She stated in a tone that was more of a promise than a threat as Riser was out of luck, beaten down and at the mercy of the woman he lusted after and got demolished by. I surrender. He got out, straining his freshly regenerated throat as Rhea dismissed her power and pulled her hand away, only to bring it down and punch him in the balls that had his testicles pop from the impact as he screamed in pain. That was for harassing my peerage in front of me. She spoke as she let go of his hair as the guy cradled his recovering balls and the rating game was called. Victory of the Gremory vs Rhea's rating game goes to Rhea's Gremory. The Ice Queen announced as the field faded entirely and returned to the stadium stage and grounds as Rhea stood up and dusted her hands. She turned to walk off the stage as medics moved in to gather Riser and take him to recover as they passed her. She saw her peerage staring at her with reactions of awe and wonder and smiled to them as she spotted Gasper with them and eating from his jar of snacks that he was gifted by a friend of hers. The sound of clapping was heard as Akeno had started to do so as she stood up, a happy smile on her face as she moved onto the stage and hugged Rhea as she returned it. That set off a spark as the audience went along and clapped, some cheering at the wild show they were given. Rhea and Akeno separating as the fallen angel took the moment to examine her best friend's new look and the unique change as she honestly found her more lovely than ever. I must know how all this came about, Rhea. Your new look, the powers you displayed, everything. she said in a bit of a heated tone as Ria smiled and knew Akeno always looked out for her. She reached and pinched Akeno's cheek and replied. In good time, Akeno. Come, with the game over we should all return to that annoying party that was set up beforehand. She was ready to get off the stage with Akeno as Riser spoke up now as he was on the gurney ready to be carried away. How? He looked at Riaz with a frown. She raised an eyebrow as he moved to sit up despite the medics asking him to not move. How have you become this powerful? You were never capable of this strength before, where did this sudden growth come from? He demanded as he got off the gurney and stood up, pushing the people away, trying to get him back on and take him away to recover. Serziches also added his 2 cents as he stood up from his spot in the judge's spot. Yes Riaz, Riser has a point, where did this all come from and how did you attain such change and power? He asked, though it was more of a silent command to divulge what she knew, as he did keep tabs on his sister, if only to make sure she wasn't in danger while away from the family. Oh, now you suddenly care about my well-being after I beat Riser and rid myself of the stupid arrangement? She questioned with a hot tone as she was still sore about the subject and was just happy to be rid of the whole thing, even if it upset the Phoenix family. Serziches just frowned and put his hands down on the desk before him as he looked down to Riaz and replied in full leadership mode. Damn it, Riaz, this is not the time for games. I want answers now. Who or what did you meet to break the marriage contract? You know our laws and traditions and why the marriage was so necessary. You have to stop being so selfish and inconsiderate. He said as while he did love his sister, he had to put the people first here and in the public. Riaz just placed her hands on her hips and shot back with a frown of her own. So that's what this is all about, still trying to go through with the bullshit. I thought you would be happy that dear sister was not forced to marry someone she doesn't love. But I guess you're just like mother and father when they made the arrangement. You only cared about me as a means to an end and were more than happy to sell me off if it meant looking good for the people. She snarled out as she quickly calmed herself and turned to Akeno. Akeno, could you please return to your seat? She asked as Akeno was feeling the family drama as was everyone else and nodded to Riaz as she left her. Riaz looked to Serziches who held a look of shame at her words, as in a sense she was right, scanning over her parents who held neutral looks then to Riser, who was still upset and mostly healed up now. Ria's wings moved to hug her body and morphed into a cloak of sorts around her frame as the shoulders had black and red spikes jutting out and tin bat wings that went down to her shins as each wing was tipped with a golden hoop ring. Since it was asked about so nicely, I suppose I should share some details about my secret meetings with a good friend of mine. You see, this whole thing started out the night I was given the news of the arranged marriage to you. I did not take it well, and when everyone was looking the other way I ran, tried to get as far away from home as I could. I couldn't fathom the thought of such a deal being made, especially when I was so young. I had asked myself in my sorrow and heartbreak, did my family not love me anymore? Why did they want to sell me off to some sick bastard in the making? Riaz was interrupted from her storytelling as Venelana and Zeoticus shared a look. Hey, that is not true. The Phoenix yelled out as Riaz just scoffed, Riser, you're about as appealing as a decaying bag of dog shit. You treat your peerage as nothing but toys for your own pleasure to boot. You needed to be humbled before you get out of control. She shut him up with that as the Phoenix Lord and Lady sighed in embarrassment as their son was becoming known for his reputation. In my moment of weakness, I was visited upon by him. That night, a presence found its way to me, so dark, so beautiful. It was with him that I learned of a way to put an end to the merging of our families, and I am so very thankful to have someone as wonderful as him in my life. Ria smiled warmly as she had her dear friend in her thoughts and how he made it all possible. Who is this person that tampered with your devil lineage and turned you into this? Riser asked as Riaz just burst out into laughter. She took a moment to get that out of her system and compassed herself and smirked. Oh please, you think this was forced upon me? I wanted this, Riser. I was given the golden opportunity to put a stop to our wedding and I gladly took it. She voiced out. But this wedding is important. He would start before she snarled at him that sounded like an angry lioness as he flinched. Important to who? Our parents, you, the old traditions to keep the pure-blooded devils from dying out. I will not sit idly by and let our families decide my love life, especially not with you. Riaz growled out as magic emanated from her hands, calming herself as she closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and let her magic relax as she moved a hand to her camel head as it opened its mouth. A single rose was produced into her hand as she held it up for everyone to see. Apologies, I got antsy. Now, you ask to meet the lovely person who helped me into becoming what you all see before you. I will call him here for you. Riaz pricked her finger along one of the thorns and let several droplets fall on the rose petals that were a mix of blue, red and purple as she then tossed the rose and it landed on the tile floor, lighting up in vermilion flames as a small smoke trail flowed up. Up in the air above the stadium, a magic sigil formed itself into existence and glowed with hellish energy. This of course grabbed everyone's attention as they looked up to the glowing sigil as it shined and soon enough flashed as something emerged from it. The object fell and landed on the stage with a crash that threw up dust temporarily covering it, which was blown away by Riaz with her wings, as now the object summoned was in fact a person on a bench. Perfect, now that your Riaz started, but the sound of loud snoring was filling the air as she realized he was in fact sleeping on said bench he was sprawled out on, head at an angle, hence the snoring. The young man was wearing blue jeans, boots, had a reddish-brown leather jacket and opened with an orange shirt underneath and topped with a small necklace with a lovely fox charm, black gloves on his hands as his facial features were the most defining. He looked to be around the age of Surzich's in appearance, even with a bit of a 5 o'clock shadow he was sporting. His hair was a bit longer, down to his chest from the spiky blonde hairstyle he was known for, as well as losing the bright blonde luster of his human youth too, now pale blonde and somewhat wavy. His signature whisker markings were still there and faded too. All in all, he looked like a handsome young man who has been around the world and quite intelligible. Riaz just pouted with a cute frown at seeing her friend wasn't even aware she brought him here, even nudging him a few times to try and wake him up didn't work. She just raised a hand, curled it into a fist, and brought it down on his chest with a shout that sounded more like a childish whine. "Wake up, Naruto." He was promptly sent into the ground by the power behind her head as the impact threw up some dirt and revealed that he was now at the bottom of a deep hole thanks to her. "Morning to you too, Riaz, can I ask why you thought it necessary to wake me up like that?" His voice echoed out from the hole as Riaz just folded her arms and responded with a huff. "You were sleeping on a park bench and didn't even register me calling you in and trying to nudge you awake," she explained as a deep sigh could be heard from him. "Oh my bad, darling." Suddenly a golden chain shot up from the hole and grabbed hold of the edge as he pulled himself out of it and dusted himself off as he got up and the chain dispersed in energy sparks from his hand. Now revealing to be quite the tall one, he looked to Riaz as he gazed from hoof to moon icon as Riaz did a little twirl and gave a warm smile to Naruto. "So, how do I look?" she asked with a friendly tone as it was clear there was something between the two that no one had known about. Naruto just smiled warmly to Riaz as he raised a hand and ruffled her crimson hair. "Like a true duke of the underworld," he said softly in approval as Riaz hugged him and didn't care about the show of affection displayed in front of everyone. Naruto just hugged her back as he felt her emotions of joy. Riaz separating as Naruto caught the scent and sound of crackling fire and saw Rizer had a fireball the size of a boulder ready and pissed. "So, you're the asshole who destroyed my marriage to my beautiful Riaz, for that transgression, you will die." He shouted and threw the fireball at Naruto, who gently pushed Riaz away before the fireball hit its target. Rizer let out a laugh at the easy win as some of the audience booed at the attack against the new arrival. "Now that was rude, didn't even greet you, and you threw this at me." His voice could be heard as the massive fireball had been halted in the air around Naruto as it began to shrink and get sucked into a single spot. Naruto was revealed to everyone as he had his hand outstretched as the phoenix flames were being gathered into a spot in front of said hand and soon he closed the limb around the white hot ball of heat. The light peering through his fingers as it shifted red and soon he opened his hand to reveal a ruby the size of an egg in his gloved hand, its inner core glowing with fire. Naruto just smiled as he put the ruby away in his jacket and dusted his hands off while looking to Rizer. "Thanks, was needing one of those," he cheekily remarked as Rizer just growled as he looked to Naruto, coming up with some idea why the blonde before him had the gall to interfere on his marriage to Riaz Gremory and tainted her beauty. "I know. You're just jealous of nobility like me, you measly mongrel." With a snap, he summoned Yubaluna back to his side as he fondled and molested the moaning devil in front of Naruto and the audience, like before making a say annoyed at the guy. The phoenix air kissing and showing off his queen and possessiveness to Naruto and Riaz as he smirked like the kid with all the cool new toys. "Look at what you can never have, hobo." Rizer gloated and insulted Naruto's appearance as he and Yubaluna kissed like a pair of horny teens, trying to make an amateur porno. Naruto just looked to Riaz as she was pinching the bridge of her nose at the display. "Thought you said you had this covered." "Oh no I did, but due to popular demand of my new look, I had used that rose of yours, apologies." "Ah it's fine, I was on my lunch break in Germany anyway." He shrugged with a wink as Riaz smiled back to him as Naruto looked back to Rizer, who had finished his tonsil hockey with Yubaluna. "That's supposed to make me envious or something, kid. Don't get me wrong, your companion is a looker, but I'm not really seeing anything to be upset with. All I see is a spoiled brat not getting his way and throwing a fit in response." Naruto shrugged as he folded his arms over his chest. Rizer was not gonna take that insult standing as he growled and threw Yubaluna aside and prepared to fire off another fireball, only to have his hand caught in Naruto's grasp and being squeezed. Yubaluna fell back into a comfy chair that Naruto summoned as she didn't fall on her ass. The bigger blonde just held his hold as Riser found himself falling to his knees and his hand being crushed in Naruto's hold as he saw ice frosting up from the hold, making his limb brittle and letting him feel each and every crack and break from the pressure. With his other hand, Naruto grabbed Riser by his chin and forced him to look him face to face. Honest tip, don't pick fights you can't win. Naruto said as he crushed a frozen limb, making Riser scream out as now that hand did a few motions with teal aura coming from the fingers as he looked into Riser's eyes, while his own glowed a hellish red. The Phoenix found himself falling unconscious as Naruto had cast an illusion on him and then picked him up and placed him on the stretcher for those devils to take him away as Riser was muttering no, no, no in his sleep while his hand reformed and he was taken away by healers. Naruto glanced down to the small yellow crystal shard in hand as he put that away in his pocket and turned to the audience. Sorry about that folks, how about we return to whatever we were doing, the game's over, right? He looked to the judge's seat as Surziches remembered that detail and called for everyone to return to the party. Naruto just held his smile as he congratulated Rias on her win. Congrats, Rias, you're a free woman able to enjoy yourself without being hitched. He chuckled as he patted Ria's head and her response was to smile and accept the head pats. She then asked. Hey Naruto, is there a way to return to my regular form? She asked as Naruto just brought out a small black stone of sorts as he tapped it on her chest, right over her heart as her form was engulfed by black smoke that dissipated to reveal Rias was back to her normal appearance as the stone had been absorbed into her, save for her longer hair. Enhanced devil wings and the cute blooming rose tattoo over her heart now. Rias smiled with a thanks again as he cleared his throat and she remembered she was nude and her wings hugged her form to cover up. Naruto snapped fingers as a 360 shower curtain appeared around the young woman and she got her clothes back on before the covers vanished and she was back in her school uniform. The redhead thanking him again as she turned to join her friends, not aware Naruto summoned a small towel and whipped it up. Whack you. Rias screamed out that sounded more like a masked moan as her hands instantly clamped over her mouth with wide eyes and she turned to Naruto with a surprised look that basically asked, what the hell was that for? As she just got towel whipped in her ass with Naruto holding his cheeky grin as the towel vanished. That was for the love tap to wake me up. Was his reply as she just rolled her eyes and lowered her hands. Rias. The sound of Surzich's voice made Rias look and see her brother, Grafia and her parents walk over to her and Naruto as she could spot the Phoenix family and Riser's peerage following after those who took Riser to recover. She looked back to her family as her peerage watched from the edge of the stage. We need to have a word with you, privately. Flashback. Little Rias had calmed down from her sobbing earlier as she was sitting on the shoulder of the young man, who introduced himself as Naruto Uzumaki when asked, her hands holding on his head as she felt safe around him. Having cast a small spell of comfort as he helped the young girl from her hiding spot and was taking her back to her home, which Rias surprisingly was content with considering her earlier mood and act running away. Where are you from mister? I never heard of an Uzumaki clan. She asked as being in his presence just made her feel better and washed away her fear. I'm not from around, little cherry, new in town. He replied as he carried the princess back home, but Rias tugged his hair gently as he looked to where she pointed. We can't forget my friend Akeno. She pouted as he nodded and went over to the frozen girl, waving his hand before her face and muttering sleep as he caught the now asleep child and earning a thank you from Rias as he took them back, Rias on his shoulders and Akeno in his arms. Now, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what is a little one like yourself doing out in the rain? You'll catch a cold. He asked politely as he glanced up to her as Rias had the decency to frown cutely at his words, had a point about getting sick, especially since she was just in her dirty pajamas. My parents don't like me anymore she got out as she sniffled, her happy mood instantly brought down by the reality of her life. Nonsense, children are a blessing to their parents, no child should be hated by their family. He rebutted as he sensed her negative emotions. Rias didn't comment as she doubted he was even aware of her problem. But she continued instead of telling him off like any noble would about private affairs. Mom and dad said that there was a big fight earlier and hurt a lot of people. So, the remaining families want to try and fix things up and now they want to get rid of me she sniffed and wiped her budding tears as Naruto just frowned at her words. So this was in regards to the civil war that ended sometime after he arrived to this lovely place. The remaining pillars wanted to try and preserve their pureblood lineage in the wake of this system that was in the works by the top leaders and their plans to replenish their losses, something to do with the game chess. Well that was what he got off his intel and snooping around in places he shouldn't. Right, so the clans are wanting to try and keep their influence and arrange marriages that would benefit them. And your family is also going with emotions here to not look bad. But I don't want to be some creep's toy, I want to pick who I want to love. She whined out. They had arrived at the mansion as he whistled at the sheer size of the place, and here he thought the Hyugas and daimos back home were full of themselves with their castles and compounds that took up chunks of villages. Rias guided him around the house from the outside and pointed to the window of her room as Naruto floated off the ground and into her bedroom after opening the window. He placed a keno in her bed and used a heat spell to dry her wet clothes before tucking her in and moved over to Ria's bed and plucked her off of him, setting her down on the furniture. I hear that, little cherry, earning a pout from the cute nickname he bestowed upon her. No one wants to be stuck with some jerk who doesn't like them for who they are. But with the recent big event everyone is coming back from, sometimes those in charge must make tough choices when it comes to their people they watch over and protect, even if it means upsetting a few people in the process. He said as he gently knelt down by the bed, so he was level with Rias and gave a smile to her. Sometimes, in order to prevent war and stop stuff like arranged weddings and one-sided treaties, you have to gain influence and power if you want to change the world for the better and help those stuck in situations like yours. You see, war and peace have a cycle, people meet, agreements are made, some bad seeds break the rules, tensions rise, peace talks fail, and war breaks out. Rinse and repeat every while or so, as not everyone are good with the terms and take matters in their hands. It's an unfortunate part of any civilization's history regarding allies, enemies and neighbors, and quite hard to just make people get along and come together. I should know. He explained in simple terms and used a piece of paper and his magic to animate a small stick figure drawing to go along with his words as she watched with curiosity. Were you in a war, mister? She asked as his tone about the Civil War seemed like he knew how things would play out after such an event. Her question just had his warm smile shift to a defeated smile as he couldn't help but look to the floor, his mood shifting a bit. Lost quite a few friends, he uttered out, sounding like he held himself accountable for their deaths as she felt bad for him and reached out to pat his head. This of course had his mood change as he faced her again, any semblance of sadness gone from his eyes. But that's enough about dear old me, you actually summoned me earlier and as per the rules, I'm here to strike a deal with you. He smiled once more as Rias remembered something about devils making deals with others when summoned. Wait, are you a devil? She asked in surprise, he didn't seem like one, and his energy was hard to place really. Nope, I'm just your local magic genie. His response just had a question mark appear above her head before it turned into an exclamation point as she got it, a bright smile on her young face as this was her chance. I wish to have the power to break my marriage. She wished with a finger raised, looking cute in her moment of triumph. A couple moments passed as nothing happened and she looked around. Did it not work? I don't feel any different. She asked as Naruto couldn't help but snicker, which got a pout and mean glare from the princess. You lie. She whined as he barked out a laugh. I can't grant you something you already have, lil cherry. At her confused look, he just explained and poked her right over her heart. You see, you already have the power to better yourself and choose your own life and love. But as of right now, you're still too young to even get a grasp of your powers. Not to worry, as with training and growth, you will be able to. In fact, I can help you unlock your true potential. I can be your secret teacher if you wish to unlock your true power and dreams. Would you like that? He offered and she nodded and asked after realizing. But mister, how will that work? Mommy and daddy keep a close eye on people coming and going, and big bro is suspicious to strangers he doesn't know. Naruto just nodded at that as he picked up the paper he used and asked. Want to see a magic trick? He then held the paper in hand as he waved the other hand over it in a circle, the paper glowing as his energy seeped into the item, and the paper shifted, changing shape and becoming a rose, its petals a beautiful mixture of blue, purple and red. Rias was taken back by the pretty rose as he offered it to her and she took it, handling it gently like it was made of thin glass. Call me for your secret training, just hold that close and focus on my name, just make sure you're alone and no one is following you, okay? Not everyone is aware of me, and I'd like to keep it that way for a while, at least until I'm settled in, okay? He instructed as she shook her head yes, getting up to leave as he ruffled her hair with a smile. He went over the Akeno and reached into his cloak, bringing out a small handmade felt doll that was dressed as a Maiko with hair like Akeno's, but the button eyes were a light brown to her purple. He gently placed the doll in her arms as she hugged it to herself, then using some heat and cleaning spells, he made sure Rias was mess-free and any evidence of his presence was zero. Returning to the window and ready to leave. You promise? He stopped at that as he turned back to face her and gave a bow, not some mock bow or an extravagant one, but a simple one that conveyed respect. Straightening up as he gave one of his warm smiles at seeing her questioning and sad look, like she thought he was gonna bail on her. Promise of a lifetime, good night Rias Gremory. He waved as he hopped out of the open window as it closed and locked while Rias snuggled into her bed, hiding the rose under her pillow as she held a smile and went to sleep. Naruto was at the edge of Gremory territory when he raised a hand and snapped his fingers, time resuming as his form burst into demon bats and scattered into the night sky. Present. We find everyone back at the Gremory mansion where that party was set up for the wedding between Rias and Riser, except that union was over by the lovely lady, and now there was a light air of confusion. Course that confusion was divided between two things, the whispers of the pureblood still fading out as always with the current climate. The other factor was currently sitting on a couch near the long table of food and drink for the guests, enjoying a can of soda, compared to the variety of expensive and tasteful alcohols offered by the Gremory's wine cellars. He was just by himself as Rias was off in Zeodicus's study having their family talk, so he just kept silent and unassuming as big noble parties like these were not his style. He was busy thinking what to make for dinner tonight as Rias Peerage, along with her other friends like Sona and Sakvara, made a beeline towards him after dressing all nice for the party. Everyone else was keeping their distance as he reeked of commoner. "Good evening, sir." Akeno started off as Naruto looked the group over, smiling as he replied. "Hey, you guys must be Ria's little group of friends." At their nods he chuckled, "She didn't tell me you were all so cute." He complimented before getting up to help himself to the assortment of foods with them following him. "Boss man, it's good to see you." Gasper announced with a smile as Naruto got a high five from the damper. "Hey Gasper, how's it going, still practicing with your powers in your room and those books I gave you?" he asked as Gasper nodded happily. "Yep, I want to spar with you sometime to show my improvements, Candy." He offered one of those tardigrade-looking critters, Cryptobites from Death Stranding, cute little bugs, from the glass jar he was carrying around to Naruto, who accepted it and popped it into his mouth to eat. B+. He asked as Gasper nodded. He ruffled Gasper's hair like a big brother would before returning to select his food as the little talk between him and Gasper confused the group of teens. He knew and was friendly with Gasper. "You're friends with Gasper, sir?" "It's Naruto, sir makes me feel old." He admitted as Akeno corrected herself. "Yeah, Rias told me when she took him in during one of her lessons with me. I heard about his issues and approached his father and had a chat, soon after I took to helping Gasper harness and control his abilities and better his personality. It's a work in progress." He said as Gasper blushed at the last part, still shy and meek around others that were not Naruto. He had selected his food, bunch of meats, greens, grains and some sweet dessert to go with what he was hungry and that little Cryptobiad only fed him a sliver. "So wait, who are you exactly and what do you do for a living? I've never heard of you and from the sound of it, you and Rias have some sort of secret friendship together and it's been kept from everyone until now." Sona asked as she prided herself on knowledge and going by the rules. Naruto just munched on a kebab before swallowing and answering the question as he shrugged nonchalantly. "Name's Naruto Uzumaki and I'm just a simple man making his way in the universe. As for me and Rias, she's the student and I helped her bloom into a beautiful rose worthy of her family name and choose her life as she desires." His answer was satisfactory for some as they accepted it, others though. "Hold it, then what was the vial she drank before becoming that thing?" Issei demanded as the resident pervert was still new to all this stuff as Naruto just focused on the new vessel of Drag, catching a whiff of the dragon within Issei as he made a note about that in his mind. Rias is still Rias, that form of hers was just her true power of the Gremory bloodline emerging, the Bale bloodline, and powers takes priority over lesser devil blood due to its status as the king of kings and topmost clan amongst the 72 pillars. As for the little vial, that was her power, I just used my dark arts and some of her blood to make a small enhancing agent and poof, Rias is now capable of utilizing both sides of her family's powers as well as embracing her demon heritage to the fullest. He explained as if talking about the weather as this just confused them, here this guy was who quite literally changed Ria's power and being to harness both Bale and Gremory rather than just the power of destruction. But, her beautiful SSA muttered with tears down his face as Naruto just rolled his eyes at the pervert, kid was sound like the long-lost son of Jiraiya, bless his old hermit soul. Naruto snapped his fingers as a control spell overtook Issei, and they watched the young man straighten up, walk himself over to the couch, sit down and with one hand, bitch slap himself into sleep as he collapsed, drawing a giggle from Akeno, as Naruto resumed his meal before someone approached him from behind. "Excuse me sir," Naruto turned as he saw Grafia, the head maid of the clan and Surzich's queen standing before him. "Lord and Lady Gremory would like to speak with you and your involvement with Lady Rias." He smiled with a nod and set his plate of food down as the silver maid guided him away and the group of friends now were left with trying to figure him out. Akeno noted that he was handsome and held a unique power as getting a red on him just filled her head with even more questions. Kaneko smelled something familiar about him and just kept to herself as she took the sweets from his plate. "You must be Grafia, Rias talks highly of you, quite the big sister figure in her life." Naruto commented as he and the maid made their way to where the family was as Grafia held her stone-cold demeanor, but replied, "I am just a simple maid to the esteemed family and support them in any way." Arriving to the double doors as she knocked on the wood and heard the enter. "I doubt that, but we all have our secrets, don't we? Catch you around, Snow White." He replied with a wink and was let it, not glimpsing the light twitch in her eye at the nickname. Naruto looked around and found the room nice as he then looked to see Zeoticus, Venilana, Surziches and Rias on the couches, the elder trio sitting on one, and Rias was on the opposite one with tea on the small table between them. He waved to the family as Rias the only one to return the gesture with a smile to boot. "A pleasure to finally meet you, Mr. Uzumaki, please sit, we have a few questions regarding your involvement with our daughter." Zeoticus greeted as his eyes focused on Naruto like he was seeing if he could find anything that would denote him as a threat, basic fatherly instincts really. Venilana held a softer gaze as did Surziches despite the mood of the room. Naruto just shrugged as he walked over and plopped himself down next to Rias. As if reacting to him, her angry mood softened a bit as she gave him a small smile which he returned with a wink. "So, I would say it's nice to finally meet the lovely family of Rias, but I guess this isn't the mood for fun conversations." He spoke as he leaned back in his seat while father, mother and son examined him. They deduced from name and appearance he was probably a mix of Japanese and European with his fair features, easily mistaken for a human, but what was intriguing was that they sensed hefty demonic power on him, in him, and also a marginal amount of angelic power mixed in as well as several other signatures. How strange. He just held a casual smile with the silence as he let them take their time. Finally, after a small moment, Surziches spoke first. "What is your profession, Mr. Uzumaki?" asked the leader of the devils. "Well, for entertainment I got several hobbies and plenty of time on them, but for feeding and taking care of myself, I'm a bounty hunter. I keep myself busy and my wallet full between both human fugitives and criminals, and of the supernatural variety." He smiled as he propped his arms over the back of the couch. His answer, and the way he presented himself, had the trio curious as they never heard of him until just recently. "Well, time for some good old-fashioned family interrogation. How exactly did you meet our daughter, and how come we have never heard of you? Surely someone that knows our daughter would be known by us as well." Zeoticus asked now. "Oh, I keep to myself mostly, nothing against you fine folks, I just like to work alone and have my alone time to boot. As for how I met your little girl. She summoned me." He replied with a shrug as if it was a simple matter. "She summoned you?" "Yeah, kinda like how you guys respond to desires and negative feelings, with the whole forming contracts with humans for power or that evil peace system if it makes more sense. Except it's the other way around between me and her." He replied as Venilana raised a brow at this. "Different how?" "It's perfectly normal for a devil to react to another." "I never said anything about being a devil, I'm actually human, least I like to think so with my current life." He said, the last part more to himself than to them really. "Bullshit. Demonic power can be clearly sensed within you, along with several other things, young man." Surziches said as he narrowed his eyes. "I got my secrets and you have yours, Big Red, let's just leave it at that, okay?" Naruto asked with a tone that was more, "That's really not something I'd like to discuss with people I just met." Zeoticus and Venilana noticed that Rias was subtly inching closer to Naruto as she kept quiet as they grilled Naruto for info. "Well, I hope you don't mind if we cut straight to the point, Mr. Uzumaki. But I hope you realize that interfering with family matters that do not concern you might put you in a bit of trouble with local authority, especially with matters such as the future of households and bloodlines." The mother spoke up as she sipped her tea as she tried being more logical and rational to Zeoticus and Surziches being the more doting and affectionate. Someone had to steer the family safely in the world of politics, nobility and the fancy stuff. Naruto just brought a hand to his chin and rubbed through his 5 o'clock shadow in thought before pointing to Venilana and replying. "You mean this whole show of the royal family wanting to keep a good look for the lower class by selling out your only daughter like a nice present to one of the other noble houses, right? Gotta say you're certainly not earning Mother of the Year awards anytime soon." He summarized scrappily as his words just really did a shit show at his observation of the whole alliance that was set up by the House of Gremory and Phoenix. While Rias had to keep a calm face lest she crack a smile at how he handled the conversation and quash her own negative thoughts. Surziches was impressed with Naruto's crass tone, Zeoticus was holding a light frown and Venilana. "I would choose my next words carefully if I were you, Mr. Uzumaki." She spoke in a way that meant she was ready to tear him open if he kept insulting. But this was Naruto, and he wasn't one to be cowed in, especially from some snobby noble who was okay with deciding how their child lived their life. "Well, if you insist, I find it hard to believe you're the parents to such a lovely young woman, sure the looks pass on, but all I see is a couple that is more concerned with the image their house has with the rest of the underworld over the well-being and happiness of their daughter, really subverting the narrative when she spoke so highly of you guys." He finished as he was less than impressed by the prestigious House of Gremory. Must be one of those noble clan styles that he slept through during his time at the academy back home. I give you some leeway because you can't get involved due to taking the throne, but still, you fucked up, some big brother you are. He looked to Surziches, who just looked down because he was right about that. He was always one for Riaz and her happiness, yet he let this go on and told her she would be happy when clearly she wouldn't be with the marriage. Then Alana's aura flared as she was not in a good mood, while the others were cautious. Naruto looked like he wasn't even fazed by the power she was releasing. And what would you know of the underworld hierarchy? You are not native to this realm despite the power within you, and you clearly were never taught manners by your parents to understand the importance of such events like joining houses. She questioned with a glare as Naruto just scoffed at her words. 1. My parents gave their lives in a sacrifice to protect me from a madman with global delusions on the night of my birth. Also he can get into some underage girls' panties, so yeah, I didn't exactly have anyone but myself to rely on growing up. 2. I happen to know quite a lot on how the government works around these parts, including a certain civil war that took its toll on your already recovering race, and the whole evil peace system that was finalized and put in place to replenish your losses. I choose to stay out of politics cause that's a whole can of worms I'd rather not sink my hands into. Naruto finished as he brought out another can of soda and cracked it open, sipping before speaking again. Now before you go off on how this is for the betterment of devil kind and how someone like myself could never understand our ways, I'd like to ask you both a question, not as the faces of the house, but as parents to two wonderful young adults. He leaned forward as he brought his hands together on his lap. This had the parents pause their anger towards him and auras disappearing. Do you hate your daughter? That question just took the words out of their mouths, as the room was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock. Naruto just held his gaze while he waited on an answer. Surziches was silent like his parents, and Riaz has been quiet the whole time since they called him in. What? Do you hate your daughter, despise her, see her in any light less than your darling little princess that you held in your arms when you brought her into the world and made all sorts of promises to love and cherish as she grew up? He added to the question as he sensed their shock, then anger returned full force. The hell kind of question is that? Of course we would never see her in any manner less than our family. Surziches got out as he had a heavy frown. Naruto just looked to him and shrugged. Really, because you guys seem pretty heavy on the whole arranged marriage and having her get hitched with someone she obviously dislikes. How would you react? Oh, say this all went according to plan and the two were together, let's say that the union brought forth a gaggle of Phoenix Gremory Pale heirs, but one day, you get a letter bringing grave news of Ria's death, not to some unknown enemy or threat to your kind, but by her own hand. He continued, using the glass of the coffee table and some small illusion magic to play what-if scenario of the wedding and how life would be between the two young adults was not for the faint of heart. Now I might be stretching a bit with Riser here, but if I got my knowledge right. The houses cannot interfere with each other's personal affairs, neither can the ruling council with you four. Now what do we know about Riser Phoenix? Well, for starters he's arrogant, believes he's of higher standing due to his house and blood, selfish, and a major prick to be around. Not to mention he's driven by 3 of the 7 sins your kind is well versed in, those 3 being pride, greed and lust. So, going with the small laws of non-interference, what's to stop Riser from slapping an evil piece in Riaz on the night of the honeymoon to solidify his hold on her and make sure not a peep of her horrid love life is uttered to you? He asked as he played the scenario out before the family, having the decency to at least pixelate the lust-driven night and seeing the gazes of parents and son fixated on her crying and depressed face. What could cause you to envision such a thing between them? Surziches asked as Zeodicus and Venilana could only watch as the scenario played out with a broken Riaz in her bed, closing her eyes one last time as she had used a magic blade to carve her arms open from elbows to wrist, bleeding out as she would be found and a blanket placed over her. The last scene showing a grieving family and a grave being lowered into the ground. Being a bounty hunter has its share of unsavory contracts. Back when I was starting out my new career, I wanted to help everyone I could no matter what, ignorant to those putting on a show and begging for partners, servants and others to come back. I was just too naive to see the bigger picture. From a young age, I was taught by my teachers to help others in need and see the good side of things and people. It took me a little while before realizing that some people would abuse my good nature and help to get their toys back. So now, if someone attempts to use my services to continue whatever relationship they might claim, I make sure they pay up with a far greater price. It's funny, humans view themselves with a sense of superiority in a way that almost mimics other races, but they have no issues engaging in acts of cruelty and torment on their fellow man, women or children. You could say I had changed my views about my race and how I worked for those enlisting my services after seeing just how deplorable mankind can get. In regards to Riser Phoenix, I saw a similar problem occurring and decided to nip it before it got out of hand and at the same time help Riaz out so she could win on her own and not have to rely heavily on the resident vessel of Drake. He spoke as he waved a hand, the glass resuming its transparency. I chose to help Riaz out, not for some ulterior motive or profit as you might think, but because I saw that beyond the obvious differences in species and so on, a little girl was scared for her future and believed she turned her own family on herself. So yes, you could say I'm interfering with your culture, but only out of a genuine desire to help someone in need and set her up so she and others wouldn't have to find themselves in situations like these. Doesn't help when you got the local horror stories going about every now and then regarding bad seeds and getting their hands on the little red game pieces. Plus, I hear you're quite different than the rest when it comes to servants, so not everyone treats their followers like family. He sipped his drink as he finished his little spiel as he looked to Riaz after feeling her move close and resting her head on his shoulder, his arm gently coming around her shoulders in a supportive hug. He could sense Riaz's emotions were a whirlwind right now and smelt a small number of tears building up in her eyes. Zeodicus and Venelana watched how their little girl was with Naruto and her telltale signs of tearing up as Zeodicus cleared his throat. Mr. Uzumaki, would you please step outside for a moment, we would like to have a moment with Riaz. He nodded and was about to move, but felt her hand gently grasp his jacket, he moved a hand over hers and replied as she looked up to him. It's okay, I'll be right outside the door. He ushered as his thumb rubbed over her knuckles. His warm smile helped her as she moved away and let him go so Naruto could step out of the room and she brought a sleeve up to her face to wipe some budding tears. Zeodicus and Venelana moved from their spot and took seats at her sides as their arms came around her to comfort and console their daughter, who they realized that they were pushing her away all this time with the arrangement and not seeing its effect. Naruto opened the door to leave as he was surprised to be joined by Surziches, but welcomed the company as he nodded for Grafia to follow the two young men. Naruto catching Ria's question to her parents before the door closed. Was I a bad child? Hope you don't mind the company, I feel it is best for mother and father to have their time with my sister and mend the strained bonds. Also, I wanted to ask you a few questions about yourself if you don't mind. The Lucifer proposed as Naruto just shrugged and nodded to go ahead as Surziches just lead them through one of the many halls away from the guests. Where are you from? And I could also ask, what are your thoughts about humankind and the other races such as we devils? Surziches was curious, here was a stranger who he knew nothing of and helped Riaz with a little deal, no strings attached in his own words. But something about Naruto was interesting, he reeked of demonic power and other types as well, but he still felt human beyond looks, no evil piece within him could be sensed either, or any of the powers of the remaining noble houses. Anything he could get from Riaz was that he was a friend of hers and he helped train her. I would say upstairs, but truth is I am just a new guy in the neighborhood, my old home is out there and to be honest, I'm liking my life here. As for your other question, it'll be simple, I've seen and dealt with worse than what I explained earlier when asked, slavery, genocide, war, corruption. It's not pretty and I grew out of my innocent views from when I was younger. I won't turn around and say humans are better than devils and vice versa, or the angels for that matter, the fallen included. The way I see things is that you all have your high points and low points, for example, I know about the Civil War, your kind had gone through a while after the Great War and the reasonings behind the implementation of the evil peace system. What I would say is that yes, there are flaws here and there, but you can fix these issues with time and effort. He answered as Surziches was impressed, Naruto spoke like someone who experienced loss and troubles and wanted to focus on a better tomorrow, how interesting. You sound like a bit of a philosopher there. Back home I was part of a nation that bred children for combat and had my fair share of life and death situations, not to mention I was thrust into a war in my late teens with a target on my back since I was born. Guess it comes with being an orphan with a dream of peace. He replied as Surziches and Grafia shared a look, war was never pretty and as both had experienced, children should take no part in it. What kind of culture was his like? I see, how old are you? You look close to my age, Mr. Uzumaki. Was his next question when Naruto spoke up. Call me Naruto, I'm only a few hundred years old, give or take a decade, I'd rather not go with having my last name be so formal all the time. The red-haired king nodded to his request, now Naruto wanted to ask something. Now that you know a few things about me and a small secret about my past, I hope you don't mind me asking you something personal. Naruto turned to the two as they noticed he cast a small silence bubble around them before asking. What's this about you getting with a human and lying to everyone that you and Snow White here got together? Sure, I can understand the motive as interspecies romance is frowned upon, but to your own family. That instant the final word left his lips, he was slammed against a wall with arm to throat and a pod sphere aimed at his chest by Surziches, several sharp icicles having been formed and aimed at his vitals by Grafia, as both glared at him with caution and suspicion. How the hell do you know of that? Normally Surziches wasn't a hard man to anger, hell he was quite like Naruto in regards for waking up with a smile every morning and ready to have a good day. It's just whenever some guy that your sister knew of, brings up a well-kept secret that he's hidden from everyone, including his own parents and sister, it just made him suspicious of Naruto's intentions, and just what the hell was he planning with something so juicy as that detail about his human wife. Easy there, Big Red, I'm not going to get a megaphone and say that in front of the news station. Also you might want to back up, don't wanna ruin your clothes with blood. He glanced down as Surziches followed and found in Naruto's right hand was a holy dagger, the handle, pommel and guard were blue and gold and fancy in design, but the blade itself was a glossy silver that glowed with light holy light. Took him a second to realize he was staring at the dagger that once belonged to the legendary King Arthur. The blade was about an inch away from piercing his sternum as the holy light from the blade had begun burning away at his clothes. Are you a spy? He questions as Naruto just laughed at that, that's good, but no, spying would imply I intend to use that information against you. Don't worry your little secret between you, your human lover, and the lovely maid here is safe with me. Seeing no ill intent in Naruto's face, Surziches dismissed his power and let Naruto go, the ice shards vanishing as well, with Naruto putting his dagger away in his jacket. How did you find that out, Mr. Uzumaki? We made sure to be quite discreet about my lord's secret love. Grafia asked as she sensed the silence barrier was still up. At least thankful he was keeping good on his word about this not being found out. That kid of yours, despite having more of his father's genes than his mother's, has the faint traces of human blood flowing through his veins, thus he's a Cambion, but that's hard to really tell when he looks and feels just like you in terms of his demonic power. That and there's not a drop of your power within him, despite your role as public mother and wife. Naruto answered as he looked to Surziches and Grafia respectively. Also, I'm not the first human to be tossed into the underworld, so I'm guessing you met her rather recently and helped her survive the rather harsh and inhuman climate for all these decades, am I right? He asked as Surziches couldn't help but nod to Naruto. Yes, she survived in this realm well, despite the curse she was afflicted with upon her arrival into hell. I found her hiding out in an old temple dedicated to one the ancestors of devil kind during the Civil War and took her in. We grew close over the time and recently after little Milikas was born, I had discovered the curse on her is slowly consuming her body. I've tried my best attempts to stall and stop it, but I'm afraid she's getting weaker by the day. Surziches admitted as for some reason he felt Naruto deserved to know such private information. Grafia remained silent as she had also gotten to be good friends with a lovely woman. Naruto just hummed to himself as he pulled the glove off his left hand asked. Does her curse look something like this? He questioned and held his hand up to the king and maid as they saw that his hand was covered in the stained glass tattoo markings of dark and warm coloration. The back of his hand had the same rose icon that Ria's now had over her heart as his fingers were left untouched besides the nails painted black. The detailing did look familiar to what was happening to the dear wife of Surziches as he cleared his throat. Yes it does, how exactly did you figure out such a coincidence? He asked as Naruto put his glove back on and gave a light smile. Well, going off your description of her showing up, the curse and the timeline of when I arrived, I happen to know this woman, she was a good friend to me early on, and I happen to know of a way to help you save her. He said with a determined look as Surziches and Grafia's eyes widened and since he was not lying. With a look they shared, they nodded and asked him to follow them as they guided him to a more secluded wing of the manor, close to Surziches' room as the redhead opened the door, being greeted by his son who was a good boy and stayed at his mother's side in her illness. Father, you're here, she started coughing again. Milikas commented out in a sad tone as he then noticed Naruto and wanted to comment, but Naruto's gaze was on the occupant in the lofty bed. Been a long time since he saw her. Miriam, he got a weak smile from the pale woman as she looked clammy. Hello Jebel. Back in the study, Riaz was being held by her parents as they had managed to get through the bulk of her long-built worries about her family not wanting her. Both parents knew they were perhaps a bit eager for the cause, and they should have been more open and thoughtful to how it would well for their daughter. We are so sorry that we were blind to your fears and never took the time to reconsider this union, Riaz. We're horrible parents. Zeodicus lamented as he rubbed Ria's back while her mother stroked her long red locks. We would never hate you, Riaz Venelana added as she held her little girl close. Perhaps some family time was needed to mend things together and focus on the new things, like the potential issues from the arranged marriage not going through. Well, best to handle it when the time comes, for now, focus on the present. Let's go get Surziches and see what can be done with the party that was thrown in advance. Maybe later we can take a small vacation together, no business, no school, just all of us enjoying the fun together, does that sound good? She asked as Riaz nodded and smiled, might take a bit, but she was more than happy to reconnect and fully trust her parents, to forgive them of their mistake. The trio then made their way out of the study and to where Surziches was as they were none the wiser about Big Bro's big secret. You look well, I remember you being blonde when we were still upstairs, all those years ago. Naruto had pulled a chair over and sat at the side of the bed as he and Miriam caught up, like old friends. Very funny, you were blonde as well, though your hair seems to have a bit of the blonde remaining compared to mine. Pausing to drink some water from the glass on the nightstand. I heard you've been quite busy over the years, she smiled as a small pink pixie with 4 arms. Known as a Karaboss, a type of cousin to the fairy race, peeked out from Miriam's flowerpot on her nightstand and waved to Naruto. Hi master. He waved to the small creature as he felt Miriam's hand on his knee and a concerned look in her weary eyes. Did you find them? She asked as Naruto knew who she was asking about. He just gave a sad smile and patted her hand, responding. I did, they didn't make it and I made sure to give them proper burials. He answered as Miriam closed her eyes and exhaled, those poor children. I heard the curse was consuming to you, Miriam, I'm here to put a stop to it. He said as this caught her attention as she looked to him. You can remove it. No, unfortunately, once bound, it's permanent, but I can permanently halt its spread and let you live with Big Red and the cute little family you're a part of. He said as he summoned a familiar black and gold book, one that the others recognized. Is that? Grafia asked as Surziches spoke. The Libra Logoth, the occult book in the Enochian tongue, desired by many for its ability to summon demons and commune with the angels. Also believed to be the source of the great calamity that consumed almost all of London in the 18th century during the eruption of Mount Laki. How do you have it, Naruto, or is it Jebel? He asked as he was curious why Miriam called him that. Naruto just smiled. Jebel was the name I took during my short time upstairs when I arrived. Miriam had some trouble with my real name, so she called me Jebel, it stuck. As for this little tome, it's mine after I pried it from the cold dead hands of the alchemists that did this to us as they were dragged to hell as well. Did a few favors for the angels to fill out some things in the book as well. He replied with a shrug and looked to Miriam. Alfred is still around and kicking, he's taken a vow to remain down here as punishment for his time with the guild and the project, even though he turned against them for us in the end. Maybe you can knock some sense into his old head and visit him as he's holed up in my place. He offered as Miriam smiled and nodded. The old alchemist was like a father to her and the children and tried to stop the ritual as he saw it was completely immoral and dangerous. Naruto opened the book and flipped through pages as he began speaking the old tongue. The page glowed as the runes and letters floated off the page and above Miriam, forming a runic circle above her form as he kept going. This might hurt a little, Miriam, apologies. He said as he resumed, the glyph glowing as small jolts of power danced over it. Naruto pointed his hand to her and with a final word, the spell rushed down and poured over her body. The pain had her hiss and groan as her body strained and spasmed. Everyone watched as the black symbol slithered over her body to the edges of her limbs and up her neck. A small huff of power had exhumed from her body as the seals finished imprinting on her as she collapsed on the bed. Grafia immediately moved in to check and sensed she was alright. Inhaling deep breaths as her eyes opened and she looked to the concerned group. All done, how do you feel? Naruto asked as Miriam raised a hand and hit him with a blast of magic water. She moved to sit up as she felt better, in fact, there was no gnawing feeling in her bones from the demonic essence. She moved her limbs and checked herself as she smiled. I'm not ill. Yeah, it was easier to perform for you as your level of corruption isn't as big as mine, plus made some changes from when it was done for me. He commented as he dried off and Miriam hugged her husband, son and best friend. Thank you. She told him as he just smiled with a bow and put the book away as he made his way to leave and let them have their moment. Now if you'll excuse me, I am starving, also might want to get a few chairs, Big Red. Naruto had opened the door as Rias, Venelana and Zeodicus were at the doorway, surprise on their faces as they looked at the scene. Naruto passed by and winked to Rias as he closed the door behind the family to let Surziches explain himself to his parents. He made his way back to the party and picked up his dish, finding out his sweets were taken as he just grabbed some more and resumed his meal. He finished and thanked the chefs in charge and even tipped them generously as he felt someone push him from behind, which felt like a soft object being thrown at him really. Turning to see Ravel Phoenix with a scowl. He also saw Riser's peerage and his family except Riser himself and another there as well, all concerned and wanting answers. What did you do to my brother? The small blonde demanded as this drew everyone's attention, the Gremory family having returned as they planned to talk later as Rias was in a red dress to fit the occasion. Nothing big, just put him in a bad dream. He answered with a shrug. Liar, he's screaming bloody murder like he's being tortured. One of his peerage called out as they had been with the guy since the game ended, watching as the medics could do nothing to break the magic over him as he writhed in the bed wailing don't hurt her, take me instead. It was a heartbreaking sight for one such as him that was so cocky and arrogant to be broken and raving. Unknown to everyone, someone had arrived and was making his way through the crowd politely to the Phoenix family. "Could you please reverse whatever you did to my son, young man? Also, how are you able to do such a thing? We Phoenix have a natural immunity to illusions." The mother, Cassandra Phoenix, asked as while both parents were wanting to curb their son of his ego after his loss, the current spell he was under had them worried. Naruto just snapped his fingers as he dismissed his own work over Riser, who had calmed once it was broken. Naruto was about to reply when another voice was heard as he sensed a friend, having him mutter, "Here we go." The room darkened as everyone watched tendrils of ash and embers form before them to show images of humanity within the country of Europe during the 18th century. The year was 1783 as mankind had entered the Industrial Revolution. With the rise of the age of progression and discovery, the people enjoyed the new benefits and luxuries afforded thanks to the help of science and technology. However, not everyone was content with this massive shift in culture. The image shift from the people to the inside of a large church, where a group of priests and scholars were convened around a large table arguing and so on. The church, fearing that the new age would see the dissolution and abandonment of their wealthy patrons and their followers, turned to the alchemy guild of their order with an idea. A message in which to secure their standing and not be forgotten by the people. The alchemist had gone about gathering orphans from the streets as they turned, were gifted demonic crystals that was in the possession of the church. But the necessary components and an old book they've kept to themselves, they set about creating the Shardbinders, humans fused with the demonic crystals and its energies, in order to offer up to hell and summon demons to answer their call. However, they found out all their sacrifices were not working as one by one, each child was consumed by the power implanted in them. The next scenes showing the experiments the orphans went through, the power being put into them, then seeing them scream and go into a seizure upon the altar as the crystal burned them to ashes, as only the gems remained. For some it was a horrid sight as they couldn't stomach the view, Asia looking away as Issei hugged her while he watched. The scene of a blonde-haired Miriam being sacrificed had Surziches put a comforting arm around her as her family gave her looks of sympathy and remorse, seeing what she went through. But their time running short and on their last sacrifice, they were all but ready to report their failure to the church, but against all odds, it worked. The young boy known as Jebel proved to be the perfect conduit as he had adapted to the demon power far better than the others, and the ritual was completed upon his sacrifice. Countless demons poured forth through the gateway that was opened and rained hellfire upon the city, just as Mount Laki had erupted and blanketed the countryside in darkness. Thousands perished as a result of the foolish plans, and the church did their best to cleanse the world of the demonic invasion and any evidence of the events that transpired. All related to the Shardbinder experiment were killed by the demons, thus leaving the church to wipe their hands of the mess. In a few decades, it was all but forgotten by mankind as they entered the 19th century. What happened to Jebel is unknown as he disappeared without a trace in the underworld. The person finished as the scenes showed Naruto's sacrifice, the demon invasion and the church working overtime to stop it as all records of their plan were destroyed. A few angels even having to step in and wipe the horrible memories away from the survivors as it was blamed on the Laki volcano for the disaster. The following scene showed those youths that were sacrificed were cast into hell during the Devil's Civil War. Each child didn't last long as the purity of their souls attracted the beasts of hell, and they were devoured and torn apart. Miriam ended up taking residence in the church she would be found in, as the last scene showed a young Naruto actually surviving as he had fight in him, the boy knee-deep in dead demons and wielding a makeshift weapon as he had injuries, but kept fighting them off, as the curse could be seen growing on his chest through his tattered clothes. It was fascinating to see when he slew a demon, its body and blood crystallized and morphed into a large shard and stabbed into him as he absorbed its power and used their own abilities against them. The last scene showed a slightly older Naruto making his way deeper into hell and away from the devil civilization as their war was reaching its end, the liberal Logoth in his pack he had along with other things, as he had a smile on his face. With a pulse of wind magic, Naruto dispersed the show as he gave a casual smile to the guy who just arrived and gave a little backstory about him. The evening, Roxas. Didn't think you'd show up considering your distastes for big shows like this. He chuckled as the newly introduced Roxas just shrugged and adjusted his glasses. I wouldn't have, but I heard about my dear brother getting his ass handed to him in the raiding game from Ms. Gremory with her new powers and hearing you showed up as well. Now, what did you do to my idiot brother? He asked as he folded his arms, clearly the two knew each other well, as the Phoenix family was surprised to see their second-born was back, having left the underworld a while back after a shouting match with Lord Phoenix. Nothing really, just gave him a taste of his own medicine and used his weakness against him. Naruto motioned to Ravel and then Surziches as this confused the two. Roxas sighed and ran a hand through his blonde hair. I see, did you have to use your dream devour spell on him? He asked as he plucked a drink from one of the trays. Would you rather I toyed with him, instead? Naruto asked as Roxas just frowned at the thought. No, I'd rather you don't leave him a crippled vegetable chowing on his tongue for the rest of his life. How's your hunting going, any big hits lately? He replied as the phoenix then felt a hug and looked to see Ravel, who was happy and upset with him leaving a while back. Roxas, where have you been? He just smiled and ruffled her hair as he greeted his family. Sure, he left home and wanted nothing to do with politics as father wanted of him, but he did keep in touch with his mother. Hey, sister, sorry I gave you a scare and left. How's everyone doing? He asked as he was approached by his family. Things were going to resume, if not for Riser showing up in a burst of flame from his summon crest, and he didn't look the best really. Soaked in sweat, bloodshot eyes and rather pale looking like he relived his worst nightmares on loop. Staring at Naruto as the Phoenix family went to collect him, but Roxas motioned for them to wait. Moments passing as Riser and Naruto stared at each other, then the Phoenix heir did the unthinkable, he bowed, getting on hands and knees like the Japanese did. I want to apologize for how Naruto cleared his throat as he corrected Riser, directing his attention to the real person he should apologize to. Oh, you shouldn't apologize to me, kid, that's for her. He pointed to Rias who looked unsure but kept her composure as Riser directed himself to the redhead. I wish to apologize for my actions and behavior against you and your family, Rias. I have been greedy, arrogant and an ass unbecoming of my house and wish to change my ways before they consume me. I hereby renounce my desire for your hand in marriage and wish that we could start over as friends. He said as this stunned just about everyone, save for Naruto and Roxas. Rias thought it over for a bit before she nodded and saw no issues with giving him another go, as he was a changed man from what she saw. Catching the small wink Naruto sent to her. Apology accepted, Riser Phoenix. Maybe we can be good friends in time. She replied with a smile as Riser stood up and nodded with a smile as he went with his family. Seeing as now was a good moment, Surziches announced the end of the party as he was more concerned with private affairs, like the talk with his family regarding the lie he sold. Okay, this has been a truly eventful party and unfortunately, it's about time we wrap this all up. Wouldn't you all agree? He asked as many agreed and things were being closed, however someone had wanted something of Naruto as he found an old man from the house Nibiria smiling to him. Can I help you? Yes, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with Lord Phoenix and heard you were a bounty hunter. I was wondering if I could request your services, young man. He asked nicely as Naruto could smell the pride coming off this guy and knew a few things about his house and one of its members. So, he figured to enlighten him. Sure, who is the target? He asked as the man's demeanor shifted, Happy was now mad, glowering as just thinking about that bitch had him in a bad mood with her actions and the slander on the family name. Yes, there is a wench that has cost me greatly and murdered a member of my house upon being drunk with power. She goes by the name of Kuroka Taoju, and she's a very dangerous criminal, one of our highest. He brought out a wanted notice and showed it to Naruto as he looked over the photo of the feline beauty and the price on her head. Rias, her family and peerage stood by as they watched the exchange, as no one noticed Kaneko stiffen at the mention of her estranged sister. Naruto took the paper offered, and without a wasted moment, the item burst into flames and fell to the floor as ashes. Sorry, I can't accept this particular bounty. He said as this upset the old devil, who was clearly showing his displeasure at being rebuffed. Excuse me, do you have any idea who you are talking to? He questioned as Naruto just picked something out of his jacket and flicked it to the Nibirius clan leader. He caught it and opened his hand to see an evil piece with several cracks and chips along it. The bishop. I can't accept the contract because said individual is already dead, that is the position she was given when she was brought into your house, right? Now I'm not part of this whole system, but I'm positive the removal of a piece results in death or the person is killed and the piece is ejected, right? He said as the devil nodded dumbly, more surprised that he couldn't enact his vengeance on Kuroka himself for her defiance. I take it you have the reward on hand for her bounty? Naruto asked as he might as well make good here as Lord Nibirius compassed himself and nodded, snapping his fingers as he summoned a briefcase full of cash and handed it to him. Naruto took the handle and gave a nod. Pleasure doing business. With that, he turned to make his leave, but stopped before the Gremory group. He gave a smile and reached out with a hand to Surziches, who returned and shook his hand. I'd make some changes to this game that you guys set up, make the rules fair. Pipsqueak got lucky with his obsession with ladies, and she was kind enough to accept a second chance, even if she was working with the enemy as the church says. Not many people like having no say in being chosen and being a servant for another. He spoke while pointing to his say in Asia as Surziches saw logic and would speak to the other leaders about the raiding game's rules. Thank you for helping my family, Naruto. If you're ever around, feel free to stop by. The Lucifer leader said with a happy look as Naruto saw no issues with that. He got a hug from Miriam as he slipped a small piece of paper in her hand with a phone number on it, winking so she could keep in touch as he said his goodbyes to the rest of the group. Rias was the last one to see him go as she hopped in his arms with a strong hug, her wings hugging around him as he chuckled. "Thank you for everything, Naruto." She broke their hug and slipped the phoenix tears she got earlier from Yubaluna in his jacket pocket when no one noticed. He just ruffled her hair and nodded. "That was all you, Rias. You don't need to thank me for anything, friends stick together right?" He grinned as she hugged him again, just enjoying the moment before she separated and let him out of her house. "See you around, Princes," he called out as she waved and closed the door before returning to her peerage, noticing someone was missing. "Hey, where's Kaneko?" Naruto had brought out a pair of keys connected to a small keychain of a rabbit's foot, pressing the unlock button as a car materialized right in front of him in the entrance. The car itself was a slick-looking hot rod with a black body and red flames running along the front. Looked like it hopped straight out of the pages of a car collector's wet dream. He put the money in the passenger seat and went to the driver's spot when he paused and turned to see Kaneko standing there. Nothing was said as he felt her emotions, resentment, anger, pain, fear and love. "Is Kuroka really dead?" she asked, biting her cheek to get the words out. Her eyes looking at him wanting to answer her. Naruto knew who she was, seeing as he was a close friend to the feisty cat. He let out a sigh as he knew this might be a thing. He hated bearing bad news for others. "You're her sister, Kaneko, right?" He got a nod as an answer and just folded his arms, prepared to break her heart with the truth. "Thought so, truth be told she was a good friend of mine, she honestly wouldn't shut up when it came to you, her beloved and sweet sister, you still care for her." He commented at her silence as he picked up the lingering emotion she tried so hard to quash. "Is it really noticeable?" she asked with a small whimper at the end. Naruto knelt to her level as he added, reaching out to rub her shoulder in comfort. "Nothing wrong with that, despite her abandonment of you and that hate, you still remember the good memories of her tucking you in at night and making sure you had a warm meal and a place to live when you two were alone. She thought the world of you and wanted only the best, even when she went crazy with Senjutsu and went on a rampage, she never harmed you. When she was still around, she always wanted to see you again, to make sure you were living a good life that she tried her best to give you before it went to shit. She would be happy if she saw you now, with nice friends and well on your way to finishing school." He said as he saw she was starting to tear up, his words getting to her. "How did she die?" she asked, her voice wavering as she did her best to try and stop her tears. Naruto looked down as he thought for a moment, but relented and answered. "Even though we were close friends, she knew my profession and feared I would bring her in for the crime she was guilty of. No matter how many times I assured her I would never do such a thing, the thought remained and grew. It was several years ago when her paranoia broke and she ran off. I gave chase trying to calm her down in a big game of cat and mouse, as she ended up taking her own life before I could get to her, all that remained was that evil piece you saw earlier. I'm so sorry for taking her from you," he finished as Kaneko had her head down and he saw tears hitting the ground. Now he felt like real shit as he could hear Kaneko's light whining as she cried over the loss of her sister. "Hey, I got something for you. Think of it as a gift from your late sister." Reaching into his jacket, he pulled out a kitten that looked adorable with its black and white fur, though three things stood out. The kitten had two little horn nubs growing from above its eyes, its ears were bat-like, and it was about as big as Kaneko's torso. She wiped her eyes and looked at the infant cat in wonder as she's never seen such a specimen before. Naruto gently offered the kitty to her as she tenderly accepted and held it like one would a newborn. "Kuroka was caring for some cats that I had as I was busy with work, spoiling them plenty as they grew up to be quite lovely. This little girl right here was the runt of the litter the mother gave birth to, and something tells me Kuroka would want you to have a cat that she owned," he said as Kaneko looked at the kitty as it woke up from its nap and mewed, reaching and pawing at her face as Kaneko couldn't help but smile. Naruto stood up and got in his car as he let Kaneko move away as the engine roared to life. He reached and ruffled Kaneko's hair as he gave a small smile. "See you around, Kaneko." But that he drove off as Kaneko watched him go before returning to the house, new friend in tow as she was thinking of a name for her new companion. She also felt something when Naruto put his hand on her, it was Senjutsu. Elsewhere. Where am I? The woman asked herself as she was coming to. This wasn't what she expected death to be, finding herself in a cell as she was on the bed, a fireplace built into the back wall and burning blue flames. She was happy her clothes were still on, but the inclusion of a chain and cuff around both her ankles was annoying as she tried using her light spear to break it, only for the spear to fizzle out the moment it made contact with the dark metal. She tugged at it as it was impervious to anything she tried as she looked around. Alwarna wondered where exactly she was and how did she avoid death, as the last thing she remembered was being hit by Ria's pod when the group came in to save Asia from the Fallen's plan to extract her sacred gear. Back home in the shinobi world, a couple years after the end of the Fourth War and Naruto's death. Peace was at an all-time high as the villages were getting along happily, Minato retaking to Hokage reigns as he did something interesting. Before Hiri took the position, he approached Fugaku and offered to split the title between the two of them, citing that the past mistakes of the previous cage always came down to the sole leader's decision and wanted to change those rules. He stated that the exclusion of the Uchiha was one such mistake that should no longer be in effect and wanted to bring the clan back into the village wholly. Fugaku was hesitant at first, believing this to be a sham. But Itachi and Sasuke had convinced him that Minato was genuine with his offer and wanting to change the rules of the village, so he ultimately accepted as both Minato and Fugaku became the first dual Hokage as they worked together to help the village and its people. Fugaku had appointed Itachi as head of the police force in his stead as Sasuke went on his reconnaissance mission and atonement for his bad deeds, but stopping by often for his family and to see Sakura. Biba knocked on the doors of the main Hyuga complex as he was wondering how Hinata was as she took the death of Naruto the hardest out of them all, more so than his parents. He did care for her like a little sister and hoped she hadn't done anything drastic. The doors opened as he was greeted by her father and mother, Hiashi and Hinoka. "Hey, is Hinata home? I was wondering if she was available for lunch," he asked as Hiashi was with his usual stern look as Hinoka smiled, knowing her teammate was looking out for the young woman as she replied. "She is, just a moment and she'll be ready." She left as Kiba and Hiashi stood there, a moment of silence as Kiba cleared his throat. "So, how's the family going?" he asked in an attempt to lighten the mood as Hiashi just let out a sigh and replied. "It is well, Inuzuka. However, my daughter has kept herself stooped up in her room, depressed over the loss of Naruto Uzumaki. We have tried everything, but nothing is getting through to her. Hopefully you and her team might have luck where we do not." He admitted as he ignored the Hyuga elder's sneers about Hinata as the father in him wanted his girl to overcome her depression. Hooker returned with Hinata as Kiba held back a wince. She was gloomy, bags under her bloodshot eyes as he could tell she wasn't getting enough sleep. "Hey Hinata, you want to grab a bite, my treat?" he offered as she smiled and hugged her parents before going off with Kiba. He led her to a restaurant as he got them some seats and drinks. Noting her silence as she was receding into herself, he knew her affection for Naruto and how much he meant to her, even if the Dumbus wasn't even receptive to her obvious signs. Hell, he missed him too, they all did, but they all came to accept his loss and move on as several got together, like Sasuke and Sakura, to no one's surprise. "How are you doing Hinata, you feel alright?" he asked as he was trying to get her to open up. It was like a tug of war as he watched her sit there and stare at her menu with a blank look. The waiter took his order as he said to give Hinata some more time as she didn't even respond to him when asked. Biba just bit his cheek as he scratched his brain for something that would get Hinata out of her self-imposed isolation. That's when it hit him, it was a stupid idea and he barely recalled that night he and Naruto went out for drinks. "Biba, you're a genius. This might work and we need to stop by the memorial stone later to pray in hopes we don't get haunted by Naruto's ghost," he thought to himself, his hand coming to go over hers as her eyes snapped to him. He swallowed as he prepared to spill the beans, hoping that Naruto's ghost didn't come after him for this, as the whole thing was a drunken dare anyways. "Hey, I remembered that Naruto visited the hospital a while back, something about a new donation drive for a bank inside. The place might still have something of his if you want to take a look after lunch, okay?" he said as her eyes brightened as she put the pieces together. The words seemed to have lit a fire within her as she waved for a waiter and ordered her meal as Kiba couldn't help but smile as Hinata was coming back. Flashback. It was the years of the Civil War in the United States of America, North versus South. The war itself was going in the favor of the North with battle after battle as deep within the South, a prominent family of slavers did not like the idea of the Union winning and losing their right to slavery that they saw as a God-given right. So, they turned to the occult in hopes to wish a Southern victory and curse the North for their heresy. Using all their slaves they owned, they set up a blood ritual in the living room to summon a servant from hell on their behalf, gutting and butchering the scared slaves to get the ritual right as they placed body parts along the sigils and the corpse of the infant in the middle. Following some heavy chanting and offerings of the souls of the slaves, their plea worked as the house shook, candles lit up in great balls of flame, and anything glass shattered. The lights dimmed as they watched as the blood pooled into the center of the ritual and the corpse of the child sank into the formed blood puddle. A demonic hand shot out, rather a skeleton hand as it was clawed, and the bones themselves looked monstrous. Fear was apparent in the humans as they saw the skeletal beast that emerged for their call, as it was clearly inhuman and large, around 8 to 9 feet tall, demonic, even as it had a sharp tail of sorts, large wings, and the skull of a hellish beast topped with curved horns. Standing on 2 digitigrade legs and flexing its bone hands. The eye sockets burned with red and blue energy as it was suddenly latched on by the blood, growling as the blood slid over its form, and muscles grew over the bones, and organs filled the torso cavity. The shape of the beast shifting and changing as it took a more human shape and shrunk to a bit over 6 feet tall as the muscles finished forming over the vitals and the wings and tail sucked into the body as the head morphed into a human head. Next the skin and features grew as the blood was being sucked into the person, a male going off the formed genitals as the final parts to grow in was the hair that went to shoulders and claws along his fingers and toes. He was covered in blood and nude as the crystal growth was on his chest and grew further as it reached his shoulders and pelvis, some along his arms and legs as he opened his eyes. The color of his iris shifting from sapphire blue to ruby red and settling as a royal purple. Naruto Jebel Uzumaki was back in the human world. He examined himself as his form was toned and fit for that of a healthy young man that hit the gym a lot. He then saw the bloody remains he came through and then the family that opened the peephole into hell that he used to arrive. Having spent what felt like an eternity down there, he needed to catch up with the times and what happened since. Without wasting any time, he set upon the family of 7 and tore them apart in a fashion that would make people queasy. What had been hope and dreams of winning the civil war had turned into a nightmare as he murdered the family of slavers within their own home using his own hands, not caring for their pleas for mercy as they had murdered a bunch of innocents to get their wish. After crushing the skull of the last one, he explored the place and helped himself to a bath, cleaning up of the blood and gore before drying off and inspecting himself in the mirror, having to break it first as the silver properties made it hard for him to see himself. He rummaged through their closets and got himself some threads as he put on a pair of circular sunglasses and set fire to the house after going to the living room and waving a hand over the remains of the slaves, small glass balls coming into his hand as he pocketed them in his red coat and left the manor as it burned down. He had on a pair of black boots, black trousers, a dark blue shirt that had the top closed to hide his tattoo, and a red and black pea coat over it with tails that reached the back of his knees, also a pair of red fingerless gloves. He had walked into the Bayous of the South, far from the people as he reached into his pocket and brought out those glass balls, each glowing a light blue as he looked at them and with a toss, threw them before him as each ball burst in mist and formed a slave's soul. Every single soul of the slaves that were killed for him stood before him, rightly scared as even though they died. They got to see him emerging from the ritual and his murder of the family. Naruto felt pity as he put his hands together in prayer and closed his eyes to focus. "What are you doing?" a slave asked as he was an older gentleman, his wife and child next to him as they were confused. "Betting you a ride," he answered as soon the area lit up with light as Naruto stepped out of the holy rays, lest he burn under them as a honk was heard and everyone could see a gold and pearl bus form and land right next to them. The sliding door opening up as the driver was an elderly black man with pure white clothes and smiled as he saw the group. "Come on in, fellas, next stop is paradise," the angel said with a cheerful smile as the souls all got in the bus and took their seats as the father turned to Naruto and shook his hand, a smile on his face. "Thank you, young man, our prayers have been answered," he said as he then hugged Naruto as he just patted his back and let the man go, turning to leave them as the driver called out with a whistle. "Young man, I can tell from the look that you had it hard downstairs and I'd like to help a fellow brother out. Take this and give the lovely lady a call and she might be able to help you out with your tattoo," he said as he handed over a golden card as Naruto took it and looked it over. On it was the icon of praying hands and a cross underneath it. Turning it over as he only read one word, a name Gabriel. He looked at the driver and pocketed the card in his pocket. "Thanks." The angel nodded as the doors closed and he snapped his fingers as everyone on the bus sans him had delicious food appear on their service trays as the bus took off and playing some music as it soared into the sky and disappeared with a flash of light. Smiling as he watched them go, Naruto's smile dropped into a frown as he felt something press against the back of his head and a clicking sound of a revolver being cocked. Some southern hick had snuck up on him and witnessed the whole show as he didn't like Naruto, not one a bit. What the hell is a godless niggerk? He couldn't finish as Naruto's eyes had shifted red with black sclera and he reacted faster than the man could pull the trigger. Naruto had turned and with one hand, grabbed the guy's extended wrist as with his other, grabbed the top of his head and chomped down on his neck as his teeth shifted to many sharp fangs and his mouth opened wider than normal. The man went down as Naruto tore through his neck like a ravenous and starving beast. Pulling up as he let out a huff and raised a bloody hand with the human's heart in it, his long tongue emerging through his open mouth to lick some blood off as he settled for crushing the organ, rather than eating it. Features returning to normal as he wiped the blood away with the guy's shirt and some water. He spotted some gators and gave a small whistle as they swam over, and he tossed the body and head into the swamp for them to enjoy. Naruto got up and dusted himself off as he inspected the revolver he had kept from the guy along with the holster, looking it over with curiosity as he ran a finger along the barrel. Putting the gun away, he just whistled a haunting tune as he left the area. It would be days as he later showed up sitting in a chair in the center hall of the White House, having acquired a top hat since, and filing his claws down to look presentable, as well as a neat-looking walking cane, with the handle being a serpent with gem green eyes. He smiled as the doors to the Oval Office opened and he was motioned in by the security. He entered the room and looked around at the decor as he let the guard take his gun from his hip and took a seat before the desk as he looked to the current President Abraham Lincoln. The man was busy with a document that would ensure the freedom of all slaves within the South as the war was almost over. He set it aside as he was almost done with it and turned his attention to the man before him. "I hear you had come with news that should be of great concern to the top officials." Abe asked as he was informed that this Jebel has information that would be of great importance to the White House and other high positions of the government. Naruto nodded and cleared his throat. "Yep, want to ask you something, what do you know of the supernatural?" He asked as silence filled the room and Lincoln just looked at Naruto like he was a nutcase. "Get this loon out of here." One of the guards moved to grab Naruto's shoulder, but Naruto was faster, pulling the blade out from the cane, revealing it was a weapon as he aimed it along the throat of the man as it stopped him in his tracks. Naruto just blinked as with his other hand holding the wooden scabbard, he reached up and pulled his sunglasses off and tucked them in his pocket as he looked to Abe with his purple eyes. "Easy there, figured you'd be more open, seeing as you hunted vampires in your youth in revenge for killing your mother, also the axe under your desk is laced with silver and also turns into a rifle with silver ammo." Naruto pointed out as Abe looked to Naruto, then nodded to his guard as the man backed off as Naruto sheathed his blade. "Alright, I'm listening." He replied as Naruto snapped his fingers and the window shutters closed as the conversation would be held in secret and form a little something to benefit humans in the world where the holy and unholy had the advantages above all else.